1. What are the differences between JDK, JRE, and JVM? The JVM runs Java bytecode, the JRE includes the JVM and standard libraries to run Java programs. The JDK contains the JRE plus development tools like Javac, so it's used for compiling and building Java applications. 2. Is Java pass by value or pass by reference? Java is strictly pass by value. For objects, the value of the reference is passed, not the object itself. So changes to the object are visible, but reassigning the reference doesn't affect the original. 3. What's the difference between primitive and reference types? Primitive types store actual values like numbers or booleans. Reference types point to objects in memory, like arrays or classes. Primitives are faster and use less memory. 4. What is the purpose of the final keyword? Final can be used with variables, methods, or classes. It means the variable can't change, the method can't be overridden, or the class can't be extended. 5. What's the difference between and equals? Compares references, compares content. For example, two different string objects with the same text will return true with .equals, but false with equals. 6. What is autoboxing and unboxing? Autoboxing automatically converts primitives to their wrapper objects, like int to integer. Unboxing is the opposite, this helps with generics and collections that only work with objects. 7. What is the purpose of wrapper classes? Wrapper classes like integer or double let you treat primitives as objects. This is useful when working with generics, collections, or APIs that require objects instead of primitives. 8. Can a Java class have multiple constructors? Yes, this is called constructor overloading. You can define multiple constructors with different parameters to offer flexibility when creating objects. 9. What's the difference between compile time and runtime errors? Compile time errors are caught by the compiler, like syntax issues. Runtime errors occur while the program is running, like dividing by 0 or accessing null. 10. What is method overloading versus overriding? Overloading means defining multiple methods with the same name but different parameters. Overriding is when a subclass provides a new version of a method from the superclass. 11. What is a constructor and can it be private? A constructor is a method that initializes an object. Yes, it can be private, typically used in singleton patterns to prevent object creation from outside. 12. What is the difference between static and instance variables? Static variables belong to the class and are shared across all instances. Instance variables are unique to each object. 13. What is the use of the this keyword? This refers to the current object. It's useful when local variables shadow instance variables, or to pass the current object to another method. 14. What is the use of the super keyword? Super is used to refer to the parent class. You can use it to call a superclass constructor or access overridden methods. 15. What is the difference between shallow copy and deep copy? A shallow copy copies object references, while a deep copy creates a full independent copy of nested objects. 16. What is the default value of instance variables? Java automatically initializes instance variables to default values, like 0 for int, false for boolean, and null for object references. 17. What happens if a constructor throws an exception? If a constructor throws a checked exception, it must be declared with throws. If it throws an exception during object creation, the object won't be fully constructed. 18. What's the difference between stack and heap memory? Stack memory is used for method calls and local variables. Heap memory is used for objects. The JVM manages heap memory with garbage collection. 19. How does garbage collection work in Java? Garbage collection automatically frees memory used by objects no longer referenced. It uses algorithms like mark-and-sweep or generational GC. 20. What is memory leak in Java? A memory leak occurs when objects are no longer used but are still referenced, so the GC cannot remove them. Over time, this consumes memory and can lead to out-of-memory error. 21. What is encapsulation and why is it important? Encapsulation is the process of hiding internal data and exposing only necessary parts through public methods. It helps protect the object's integrity and reduces the risk of unintended interference. 22. What's the difference between abstraction and encapsulation? Encapsulation is about hiding internal details. Abstraction is about showing only relevant features. Abstraction focuses on behavior, while encapsulation focuses on internal state. 23. What's the difference between interface and abstract class? An interface defines a contract without implementation. Abstract classes can have both abstract and concrete methods. A class can implement multiple interfaces but only extend one class. 24. Can an interface have a default method? Yes. Since Java 8, interfaces can have default and static methods with implementations. This helps with backward compatibility. 25. Can we override static methods in Java? No. Static methods are not overridden, they are hidden. Which version is called depends on the reference type, not the object. 26. What is polymorphism in Java? Polymorphism allows objects to behave differently based on their actual type. This can be achieved through method overriding, runtime, or overloading, compile time. 27. What is dynamic method dispatch? It's the process by which a call to an overridden method is resolved at runtime based on the object type, not the reference type. 28. Can a class be both abstract and final? No. An abstract class is meant to be extended, while a final class cannot be extended. So it's a contradiction. 29. What is a marker interface? A marker interface has no methods. It's used to mark a class with metadata, for example, serializable or clonable. 30. What is the difference between composition and inheritance? Inheritance allows a class to reuse methods from another class. Composition means using other objects inside your class. Composition is more flexible and preferred in many cases. 31. What is the Java Collections Framework? It's a set of interfaces and classes to handle groups of objects, like list, set, map, and queue. It provides reusable data structures and algorithms. 32. Difference between list, set, and map. A list allows duplicates and maintains order. A set does not allow duplicates. A map stores key-value pairs and keys must be unique. 33. What is the difference between hash map and tree map? Hash map is unordered and allows null keys. Tree map is ordered by key and does not allow null keys. 34. What is the difference between array list and vector? Both are dynamic arrays, but vector is synchronized, which means it's thread-safe but slower. Array list is faster but not thread-safe. 35. What is the difference between hash map and hash table? Hash table is synchronized and does not allow null keys or values. Hash map is not synchronized and allows one null key. 36. What is the use of comparable and comparator? Comparable is used for natural ordering, like alphabetical or numerical. Comparator is used when you want custom sorting logic. 37. What is the difference between fail-fast and fail-safe iterators? Fail-fast throws concurrent modification exception if the collection is modified while iterating. Fail-safe creates a copy and does not throw an error. 38. What are generics in Java? Generics allow you to write type-safe classes and methods. For example, list string ensures only strings can be added to the list. 39. What is type erasure? Generics in Java are erased at runtime. The type information is only used during compilation. At runtime, the generic type is treated as object. 40. Can we create generic arrays in Java? No. Due to type erasure, generic array creation is not allowed directly. It leads to heap pollution and potential runtime exceptions. 41. What is the difference between equals, and hash code. If two objects are equal using equals, they must return the same hash code. This is essential for hash-based collections to work correctly. 42. What is the transient keyword used for? Transient is used to indicate that a field should not be serialized when the object is converted to a byte stream. 43. What is the volatile keyword used for? Volatile ensures visibility of changes to variables across threads. It prevents caching of the variable locally by threads. 44. What is method hiding? Method hiding happens when a subclass defines a static method with the same signature as one in the superclass. It's not true overriding. 45. What is cloning in Java? Cloning means creating a copy of an object using the clone method. The class must implement clonable, or it will throw clone not supported exception. 46. What's the difference between deep clone and shallow clone? Shallow clone copies the object but not the objects it refers to. Deep clone copies everything, including nested objects. 47. What is reflection in Java? Reflection allows you to inspect and modify classes, methods, and fields at runtime, often used in frameworks for dependency injection or dynamic proxies. 48. What is a functional interface? A functional interface has only one abstract method. It can be used as the target for a lambda expression, like runnable or comparator. 49. What are annotations in Java? Annotations provide metadata about code. For example, @override, @deprecated, or custom ones used in frameworks like Spring. 50. What is the difference between compile time and runtime polymorphism? Compile time polymorphism is method overloading. Runtime polymorphism is method overriding, where the call is resolved during execution based on the object's type. 1. What are the four pillars of object-oriented programming? The four pillars are encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, and polymorphism. Encapsulation hides internal state. Abstraction hides complexity. Inheritance allows reuse, and polymorphism enables behavior change based on object type. 2. What is encapsulation in Java? Encapsulation means keeping an object's internal state private and exposing only safe methods to access or modify it. This is usually done with private fields and public getters/setters. 3. What is abstraction? Abstraction focuses on exposing only essential behavior and hiding implementation details. It's implemented using abstract classes and interfaces. 4. What is inheritance? Inheritance allows one class to acquire properties and behavior from another class using the extends keyword. It promotes code reuse. 5. What is polymorphism? Polymorphism means the same method can behave differently depending on the object. It can be compile time, method overloading, or runtime, method overriding. 6. What is method overloading? Overloading is when multiple methods in the same class have the same name but different parameter lists. It's a form of compile-time polymorphism. 7. What is method overriding? Overriding means redefining a method from the superclass in a subclass. It enables runtime polymorphism. 8. Can constructors be overloaded? Yes. Constructors can be overloaded to provide different ways to initialize an object, depending on the arguments. 9. Can a class inherit multiple classes in Java? No. Java does not support multiple inheritance with classes to avoid ambiguity. Instead, you can implement multiple interfaces. 10. What is the difference between interface and abstract class? An interface defines only method contracts, until Java 8 added default methods. An abstract class can have both abstract and concrete methods. Interfaces support multiple inheritance. 11. Why is encapsulation considered good practice? Encapsulation protects the internal state of an object and gives control over how data is accessed and modified, making code more maintainable and secure. 12. What is the difference between public, private, and protected access modifiers? Public is accessible everywhere. Private is accessible only within the class. Protected is accessible in the same package and by subclasses. 13. What is package private access? If no access modifier is used, it's package private, accessible only to classes in the same package. 14. What is the purpose of setters and getters? Setters and getters control access to fields and help with validation, lazy loading, or formatting data before returning it. 15. Can a private method be overridden? No. Private methods are not inherited, so they cannot be overridden. 16. What's the difference between field hiding and method overriding? Field hiding occurs when a subclass declares a field with the same name as in the superclass. Unlike methods, fields are not polymorphic. 17. What happens if a subclass has a method with the same name as in its superclass but different return type? If the return type is not compatible, it results in a compilation error. For overriding, the return type must be the same or a subclass, covariant return type. 18. Can you override a static method? No. Static methods belong to the class, not instances. You can hide them, but it's not true overriding. 19. What is a constructor chaining? Constructor chaining is calling one constructor from another using this, or super, to reuse code during object creation. 20. What is the use of super keyword in constructors? It calls a constructor of the superclass, often used to initialize inherited fields. 21. What is multilevel inheritance in Java? Multilevel inheritance is when a class inherits from a class which itself inherits from another class. For example, class C extends class B, and class B extends class A. 22. What is hierarchical inheritance? It's when multiple subclasses inherit from the same superclass. For example, class B and class C both extend class A. 23. What is the difference between overriding and hiding? Overriding applies to instance methods. Hiding applies to static methods or fields. Overriding is resolved at runtime, hiding at compile time. 24. What are covariant return types? Covariant return types allow an overridden method to return a subtype of the original method's return type. 25. Can we override a method to throw a narrower exception? Yes. An overridden method can throw fewer or more specific exceptions than the method in the superclass. 26. What happens if two interfaces have methods with the same signature? If a class implements both interfaces, it just provides one implementation. No conflict occurs unless default methods are involved. 27. Can you instantiate an abstract class? No. Abstract classes cannot be instantiated directly. You need to extend them and provide implementations for the abstract methods. 28. Can you create an object of an interface? No. Interfaces can't be instantiated, but you can create anonymous classes or use lambdas, if it's a functional interface. 29. What is the diamond problem, and how does Java solve it? The diamond problem happens in multiple inheritance when two parent classes implement the same method. Java avoids it by not allowing multiple class inheritance. For interfaces, conflicts must be resolved manually by the implementing class. 30. Can you override a default method from an interface? Yes. A class can override a default method to provide its own behavior. This is commonly done in real-world code. 31. What's the difference between interface and abstract class in terms of constructors? Interfaces cannot have constructors. Abstract classes can have constructors and can be used to initialize common state for subclasses. 32. When would you use an abstract class over an interface? Use abstract classes when you need shared state or partial implementation. Use interfaces to define contracts or for multiple inheritance. 33. Can an interface extend another interface? Yes. An interface can extend one or more interfaces. This allows creating complex behavior through composition. 34. Can a class implement multiple interfaces? Yes. This is Java's way of achieving multiple inheritance. A class can implement as many interfaces as needed. 35. What is the Liskov substitution principle, LSP? LSP means that objects of a superclass should be replaceable with objects of a subclass without changing the correctness of the program. 36. What is the open/closed principle? Software entities should be open for extension but closed for modification. In other words, you should be able to add new behavior without changing existing code. 37. What is the interface segregation principle? Clients should not be forced to depend on interfaces they do not use. It promotes creating smaller, specific interfaces rather than large, general-purpose ones. 38. What is the dependency inversion principle? High-level modules should not depend on low-level modules. Both should depend on abstractions. This principle promotes flexibility and decoupling. 39. How does composition help in designing flexible systems? Composition allows building complex behavior by combining objects instead of relying on inheritance. It promotes reuse and loose coupling. 40. What is the benefit of using interfaces for dependency injection? Interfaces enable flexibility and testability. You can inject different implementations at runtime or during testing without changing business logic. 41. What is a functional interface? Give examples. A functional interface has a single abstract method. Examples include runnable, comparator, and Java 8's function tr. They are used with lambda expressions. 42. What are default methods in interfaces? Why were they added? Default methods allow adding new methods to interfaces without breaking existing implementations. This helps evolve APIs. 43. What is the purpose of instanceif? It checks if an object is an instance of a specific class or implements a specific interface before casting it. 44. What's the difference between a concrete class and a POJO? A concrete class is a class that can be instantiated. A POJO, plain old Java object, is a simple Java object with no special restrictions, usually with getters/setters and no business logic. 45. What is a data transfer object, DTO? A DTO is a plain object used to transfer data between processes or layers. It typically contains only fields, constructors, and getters/setters. 46. What is a singleton class? A singleton class allows only one instance of itself. It's implemented using a private constructor and a static instance method. 47. What's the danger of using inheritance excessively? Overusing inheritance can lead to tight coupling, fragile base classes, and poor flexibility. It's better to favor composition over inheritance. 48. What is a sealed class, Java 17+? A sealed class restricts which other classes can extend or implement it. It provides more control over class hierarchies. 49. Can a class be both abstract and final? No. Abstract means the class must be extended. Final means it can't be extended. These are contradictory. 50. What's the benefit of using interfaces in large-scale systems? Interfaces enable loose coupling, better separation of concerns, easier testing, and flexible design by allowing multiple interchangeable implementations. 1. What are lambda expressions in Java 8? Lambda expressions are a concise way to write anonymous functions. They allow you to pass behavior, a block of code, as a parameter. Syntax, parameters, dashed expression. 2. Why were lambda expressions introduced? They were introduced to make code more readable and to support functional programming in Java. They reduce boilerplate code, especially with functional interfaces. 3. What is a functional interface? A functional interface is an interface with only one abstract method. It can have default or static methods. Examples: runnable, callable, function, predicate. 4. What is the @functional interface annotation used for? It marks an interface as a functional interface and helps the compiler ensure there is only one abstract method. 5. What are the benefits of lambda expressions? They make code more concise, improve readability, allow passing behavior as data, and work well with streams and functional interfaces. 6. Can a lambda expression access variables outside its body? Yes, but only effectively final variables, variables that are not modified after they're defined. 7. What is the syntax of a lambda expression? Basic syntax, arg1, arg2, dash, return result. If the body is one line, braces and return can be omitted. 8. What is method reference in Java 8? It's a shorthand for calling a method using syntax. Example, string, to uppercase. It improves readability over lambda expressions. 9. What are the types of method references? Static method, class name, static method. Instance method of a particular object, obj, method name. Instance method of an arbitrary object, class name, instance method. Constructor reference, class name, new. 10. What is the difference between a lambda and an anonymous class? Lambdas are more concise and don't create a separate class file. Anonymous classes can have multiple methods, but lambdas are only for functional interfaces. 11. What is the Streams API in Java 8? The Streams API allows processing collections of data in a functional and declarative style using methods like map, filter, collect, etc. 12. What is the difference between a stream and a collection? A collection stores data. A stream processes data. Streams are lazy, don't store elements, and are not reusable. 13. What are intermediate and terminal operations in streams? Intermediate, return another stream, e.g., map, filter. Terminal, produce a result or side effect, e.g., collect, for each, reduce. 14. What does the filter method do? It returns a stream consisting of elements that match a predicate, a condition. 15. What does the map method do? It transforms each element of a stream using a function. For example, converting a list of strings to uppercase. 16. What is the difference between map and flat map? Map transforms elements one-to-one. Flat map is used when each element produces multiple elements, e.g., a stream of lists. 17. What does the collect method do in a stream? It performs a mutable reduction operation on the elements. Commonly used to collect results into a list, set, or map. 18. What is the use of reduce in streams? Reduce performs a reduction on stream elements, for example, summing values or combining strings into one. 19. Are streams lazy or eager? Streams are lazy. Intermediate operations are not executed until a terminal operation is invoked. 20. Can we reuse a stream? No. Once a terminal operation is performed, the stream is closed and cannot be reused. 21. What is short-circuiting in streams? Short-circuiting allows the stream to stop processing early. For example, limit, 5, or any match, can stop without processing the full stream. 22. What is the difference between find first and find any? Find first returns the first element in the stream. Find any may return any element, especially useful in parallel streams for performance. 23. How can you sort a stream? Using sorted. You can also pass a comparator, stream.sorted, comparator.comparing. 24. What is the difference between for each and for each ordered? For each may not maintain order in parallel streams. For each ordered guarantees encounter order but is slower in parallel streams. 25. What is parallel stream? It splits the stream into multiple threads for parallel processing. You can call .parallel stream or .parallel on a stream. 26. What is a potential problem with parallel streams? They can cause performance issues if misused, especially with shared mutable state, blocking I/O, or small datasets. 27. Can you create an infinite stream? Yes, using stream.iterate or stream.generate, you can create streams without a fixed size. Use limit to control it. 28. How do you group elements in a stream? Using collectors.grouping by. Example. Students.stream.collect, collectors.grouping by, student, get grade. 29. What is collectors.partitioning by? It splits elements into two groups based on a Boolean predicate. Example, partition students into passed and failed. 30. What is the difference between collect and reduce? Collect is used for mutable reduction, e.g., collecting into a list. Reduce is for immutable reductions like sum, average, or max. 31. What is optional in Java 8? Optional is a container object that may or may not contain a non-null value. It helps avoid null pointer exception. 32. How do you create an optional? Optional.of, value, non-null. Optional.of nullable, value, may be null. Optional.empty, represents no value. 33. What's the difference between get and or else in optional? Get returns the value but throws if it's empty. Or else returns a default value if empty, otherwise the actual value. 34. What's the difference between or else and or else get? Or else always evaluates the argument. Or else get uses a supplier and is evaluated lazily, better for expensive default values. 35. What is if present in optional? It runs a lambda if a value is present. For example, optional.if present, name-system.out.println, name. 36. How can you avoid null pointer exception with optional? By wrapping potential nulls in optional and chaining operations with safe methods like map, flat map, or else. 37. What is flat map in optional? It unwraps nested optionals. Useful when a method returns optional t and you want to chain without nesting. 38. What are the drawbacks of using optional everywhere? Don't use optional in fields, method parameters, or constructors, only as return types where null may be valid. 39. How does optional improve code quality? It forces developers to explicitly handle missing values, which makes code safer and more expressive. 40. What's the difference between optional.map and optional.flatMap? Map wraps the result in another optional, while flatMap flattens it into a single optional to avoid nesting. 41. What is the new datetime API in Java 8? It includes classes like local date, local time, local datetime, and zone datetime. These are immutable and thread-safe, unlike date or calendar. 42. What is local date used for? To represent a date without a time zone, like June 25, 2025. 43. What is local date time and how is it different from zone date time? Local date time has date and time but no time zone. Zone date time includes time zone and offset info. 44. How do you format and parse a date in Java 8? Use datetime formatter. Local date.now.format, datetime formatter.of pattern, dd/mm/yyyy. 45. How do you calculate the difference between two dates? Using period.between, for local date and duration.between, for time-based differences. 46. What is functional programming? It's a programming style where functions are first-class citizens. It emphasizes immutability, pure functions, and declarative code. 47. What are pure functions? Pure functions return the same result for the same input and have no side effects. This improves predictability and testability. 48. What are higher-order functions? Functions that take other functions as parameters or return functions as results. Lambdas enable this in Java. 49. How does Java 8 support functional programming? Through lambdas, functional interfaces, streams, and method references, allowing developers to write clean, declarative code. 50. Why is immutability important in functional programming? It helps avoid side effects, improves thread safety, and makes code easier to reason about, especially in concurrent environments. 1. What is multithreading in Java? Multithreading means running multiple threads simultaneously within a single Java program. It helps in better CPU utilization and responsive programs. 2. What is the difference between a thread and a process? A process is an independent program with its own memory. A thread is a lightweight unit within a process that shares memory with other threads. 3. How do you create a thread in Java? There are two main ways. Extend the thread class and override run. Implement the runnable interface and pass it to a thread instance. 4. What is the run method versus start method? Run is the method that contains the code to execute. Start actually creates a new thread and calls run internally. 5. Can you call run directly instead of start? Yes, but it won't create a new thread, it just runs like a normal method in the current thread. 6. What is the difference between runnable and callable? Runnable does not return a result or throw a checked exception. Callable returns a result and can throw exceptions, used with executor service. 7. What is a daemon thread? A daemon thread runs in the background and dies when all user threads finish. For example, garbage collection runs on daemon threads. 8. What is the life cycle of a thread? New runnable running waiting / blocked terminated. 9. How do you stop a thread? Use a flag variable like volatile boolean is running and check it in the run method. Avoid using deprecated methods like stop. 10. What are thread priorities? Threads have priorities from 1 min to 10 max. Higher priority threads may get more CPU time, but it's not guaranteed due to JVM thread scheduling. 11. What is thread safety? Thread safety means that multiple threads can access shared data or code without causing inconsistent results or corrupting state. 12. What is synchronization in Java? Synchronization is a way to control access to shared resources using the synchronized keyword. It prevents thread interference and memory consistency errors. 13. How does a synchronized block work? It locks an object or class so that only one thread can enter the block at a time. Example. Java. Copy edit. Synchronized, this. / critical section. 14. What is the difference between a synchronized method and a synchronized block? A synchronized method locks the whole object, or class if static. A synchronized block allows finer control, locking only a specific object or part of code. 15. What is intrinsic lock monitor? Each object in Java has an intrinsic lock monitor. The synchronized keyword uses this monitor to allow exclusive access to code blocks or methods. 16. What is a race condition? A race condition occurs when two or more threads access shared data at the same time, and the final outcome depends on thread scheduling, leading to unpredictable behavior. 17. How do you prevent race conditions? Use synchronization, volatile, atomic variables, or concurrent collections to ensure proper coordination between threads. 18. What is the volatile keyword? Volatile ensures that a variable's value is always read from and written to main memory, making it visible across threads immediately. 19. What is a deadlock? A deadlock happens when two or more threads wait indefinitely for each other to release locks, resulting in a standstill. 20. How do you avoid deadlocks? Avoid nested locks, acquire locks in a consistent order, use timeouts, or use high-level concurrency tools like reentrant lock. 21. How can threads communicate in Java? They can use wait/notify mechanism on shared objects using wait, notify, and notify all methods inside synchronized blocks. 22. What does wait do? It tells the current thread to release the lock and enter the waiting state until it's notified. 23. What does notify do? It wakes up a single thread that's waiting on the object. Only works inside synchronized blocks. 24. what does notify all do? It wakes up all threads waiting on the object. The one that acquires the lock first proceeds. 25. What happens if you call wait without synchronization? It throws illegal monitor state exception because wait must be called from a synchronized context. 26. What is spurious wakeup? A thread may wake up from wait without being notified. It's recommended to use while instead of if for conditions. 27. Why is wait/notify hard to use? Because it requires careful lock management, proper condition checks, and ordering. Bugs are often subtle and hard to detect. 28. What are better alternatives to wait/notify? Java 5 introduced high-level tools like lock, condition, blocking queue, and countdown latch. 29. What is join in threads? Join makes one thread wait for another to complete before continuing. 30. What is sleep in threads? Sleep, milliseconds, pauses the thread temporarily but doesn't release the lock if held. 31. What is executor service? It's a high-level API to manage a pool of threads, submit tasks, and control concurrency. 32. What is a thread pool? A thread pool is a collection of reusable threads. It improves performance by reducing thread creation overhead. 33. How do you create a thread pool in Java? Using executors.new fixed thread pool, new cache thread pool, or new single thread executor. 34. What is callable and future? Callable is like runnable but returns a result. Future represents the result of an asynchronous computation. 35. How can you cancel a task with future? Call future.cancel, true. If the thread is interruptible, it will stop the task. 36. What is scheduled executor service? It runs tasks at scheduled times or with fixed delays. Useful for cron-like background jobs. 37. What is blocking queue? A thread-safe queue that blocks when empty, on get, or full, on put. Examples: array blocking queue, linked blocking queue. 38. What is countdown latch? It allows one or more threads to wait until a set of operations in other threads completes. The latch counts down until it reaches 0. 39. What is cyclic barrier? It makes a group of threads wait at a common point until all reach that point. Then all proceed together. 40. What is semaphore? A counting semaphore limits the number of threads that can access a resource at the same time. 41. What is thread local? It provides thread local variables. Each thread gets its own independent value. Useful for user sessions or non-thread safe objects. 42. What are atomic variables in Java? From java.util.concurrent.atomic, they offer lock-free thread-safe operations on single variables, like atomic integer, atomic boolean. 43. What is false sharing? False sharing occurs when multiple threads modify variables that share the same CPU cache line, causing performance degradation. 44. What is lock starvation? It happens when a thread never gets CPU time because other threads continuously acquire the lock before it. 45. What is live lock? Threads keep responding to each other but never make progress, like two people trying to avoid blocking each other and stepping in the same direction repeatedly. 46. What is the difference between fair and unfair locks? Fair locks grant access in the order requested. Unfair locks may allow newer threads to cut in line, improving throughput but reducing fairness. 47. What is reentrant lock? It's a flexible, explicit lock with features like try-lock, timeout, and fairness policies, unlike synchronized. 48. When to use synchronized versus reentrant lock? Use synchronized for simplicity. Use reentrant lock when you need advanced control like interruptible waits or timed lock attempts. 49. Why is immutability useful in multi-threaded code? Immutable objects are naturally thread-safe. No need for locks, and they prevent bugs related to shared mutable state. 50. What are best practices for multithreading in Java? Avoid shared mutable state. Use higher-level concurrency APIs. Use thread pools instead of creating threads manually. Prefer immutability. Always handle exceptions properly in threads. 1. What is concurrency in Java? Concurrency means multiple tasks progress independently, sometimes simultaneously, but may share resources. It helps improve responsiveness and throughput. 2. What is the difference between concurrency and parallelism? Concurrency, multiple tasks progress independently, can be single or multi-core. Parallelism, tasks run at the exact same time, on multiple cores. 3. What is the Java Memory Model, JMM? JMM defines how threads interact through memory and how changes to variables by one thread become visible to others, ensuring visibility and ordering. 4. Why is the volatile keyword important in concurrency? It ensures that a variable's value is read from main memory, guaranteeing visibility of changes across threads, but it does not ensure atomicity. 5. What is atomicity? An atomic operation is indivisible, it either completes entirely or not at all. No other thread can observe it in an intermediate state. 6. What is visibility in concurrency? Changes made by one thread must be visible to others. Synchronization or volatile ensures this. 7. What is instruction reordering and how is it handled? Compilers and CPUs may reorder instructions for optimization. Synchronization, volatile, or memory barriers prevent harmful reorderings. 8. What is a memory barrier? It's a low-level instruction that prevents certain kinds of reordering between reads/writes in memory. Java uses these behind volatile and synchronized. 9. What is false sharing? False sharing happens when threads modify variables located close together in memory, same cache line, causing performance drops due to cache invalidation. 10. How is thread safety achieved in Java? By using synchronized blocks, volatile variables, atomic classes, immutable objects, or high-level concurrent utilities. 11. What is a reentrant lock? A reentrant lock allows a thread to reacquire the same lock it already holds without deadlocking itself, used in both synchronized and reentrant lock. 12. How is reentrant lock different from synchronized? More flexible, try lock, timeout, interruptible lock. Can be fair or unfair. Must be manually unlocked, using unlock. 13. What is the difference between fair and unfair locking? Fair, threads acquire locks in the order they requested. Unfair, threads can jump ahead, improving throughput but reducing fairness. 14. What happens if you forget to unlock a reentrant lock? It can cause deadlocks or permanently block other threads. Always use try/finally to ensure proper release. 15. What is deadlock? Deadlock occurs when two or more threads are waiting on each other to release locks, and none can proceed. 16. What is live lock? Live lock occurs when threads are not blocked but keep changing state in response to each other, yet still can't make progress. 17. What is starvation? Starvation happens when a thread never gets CPU time or a lock because other threads monopolize resources. 18. What is the difference between blocking and non-blocking algorithms? Blocking, threads wait for resources, e.g., lock acquisition. Non-blocking, threads keep working without waiting by retrying or using atomic operations. 19. What is lock-free programming? It avoids using locks altogether by using atomic variables and CAS, compare and swap, to ensure consistency. 20. What is optimistic locking? It assumes no conflict will occur, validates before committing. Often used in databases or concurrent structures like atomic reference. 21. What are atomic variables in Java? Classes in Java.util.concurrent.atomic like atomic integer or atomic boolean allow lock-free, thread-safe operations on single variables using low-level CPU instructions, like CAS. 22. What is compare and swap, CAS? It's an atomic instruction that updates a variable only if it has not been changed by another thread in the meantime. It's the foundation of most lock-free algorithms in Java. 23. What is atomic integer .increment and get doing internally? It uses CAS to atomically increment the value by 1 and return the new result, without locking. 24. When should you use atomic variables instead of synchronization? Use atomic variables for simple state changes, counters, flags, where locking would be too expensive or overkill. 25. What is concurrent hash map? It is a thread-safe map introduced in Java 5 that uses segmentation, in older versions, or internal fine-grained locking to allow high-performance concurrent access. 26. How does concurrent hash map differ from hash map? Hash map is not thread-safe. Concurrent hash map ensures consistency under concurrent reads/writes without locking the whole map. 27. What are concurrent queues in Java? Classes like concurrent linked queue, linked blocking queue, and array blocking queue allow thread-safe access with blocking and non-blocking behavior. 28. What is the difference between concurrent linked queue and blocking queue? Concurrent linked queue is non-blocking, no waiting. Blocking queue blocks threads on add, remove if the queue is full/empty. 29. What is copy on write array list? It's a thread-safe variant of array list where every write creates a new copy of the internal array. Great for read-heavy, write-light use cases. 30. What is the downside of copy on write array list? It has poor write performance due to copying the array on each modification. Not suitable for frequent updates. 31. What is the executor framework? A framework for managing thread pools and task execution. Introduced in Java 5 to simplify multithreading and resource management. 32. What are the common implementations of executor service? Fixed thread pool, a fixed number of threads. Cache thread pool, creates threads as needed. Single thread executor, one thread. Scheduled thread pool, runs tasks on schedule. 33. What is submit versus execute in executor service? Submit returns a future, allows result handling or cancellation. Execute just runs the task, returns nothing. 34. What is invoke all? It runs a collection of callable tasks and returns a list of future objects, blocks until all are complete. 35. What is invoke any? It runs a collection of callable tasks and returns the result of the first one to complete successfully. 36. How do you shut down an executor service? Use shutdown to reject new tasks and wait for running ones to finish, or shutdown now. To attempt to cancel running tasks. 37. What is fork join pool in Java? A thread pool designed for divide and conquer, recursive, parallelism. It uses work stealing to balance load between threads. 38. What is recursive task versus recursive action? Recursive task evade or returns a result. Recursive action does not return a result. 39. What is work stealing in fork/join? Idle threads steal tasks from the tail of busy threads queues to improve load balancing and throughput. 40. When to use fork/join over executor service? Use fork/join for recursive, divide and conquer problems, like sorting, searching, or matrix operations. Executor service is better for independent tasks. 41. How do you test concurrent code? Use tools like thread.sleep, barriers, stress tests, and frameworks like JUnit plus awaitility or countdown latch for coordination. 42. What are common pitfalls in concurrent programming? Race conditions. Deadlocks/live locks. Memory visibility issues. Not handling exceptions inside threads. Poor thread pool usage. 43. What is the difference between volatile and atomic integer? Volatile ensures visibility, but not atomicity. Atomic integer ensures both visibility and atomicity with CAS. 44. What is a thread-safe singleton pattern? Use the build pew method, inner static helper class, or an enum singleton. Both ensure lazy loading and thread safety. 45. When should you use thread local? Use thread local to store per thread data like user context or formatter instances that are not thread safe. 46. How do you handle exceptions in threads? Use try-catch inside run or callable.call. With executors, use future.get to capture exceptions. 47. What is the uncaught exception handler? It's a handler for exceptions thrown by threads when they are not caught. You can set a global or per thread handler to log or recover. 48. What are immutability and statelessness in concurrency? Immutable and stateless objects eliminate shared mutable state, reducing the need for synchronization and making code naturally thread safe. 49. What is a backpressure strategy in concurrent systems? It's a mechanism to slow down producers when consumers can't keep up, used in reactive programming and message queues. 50. What are some best practices for writing concurrent Java code? Favor high-level concurrency tools, executors, concurrent hashmap. Avoid shared mutable state. Prefer immutability. Don't reinvent synchronization primitives. Monitor and test under realistic loads. 1. What is a transaction in software systems? A transaction is a sequence of operations performed as a single unit of work. It must either complete fully or have no effect at all or nothing. 2. What are the acid properties of a transaction? Atomicity, all operations succeed or none. Consistency, data remains valid. Isolation, transactions don't interfere. Durability, changes persist even after failures. 3. What is the difference between a commit and a rollback? Commit makes changes permanent. Rollback reverts all changes since the last commit, maintaining consistency. 4. Why are transactions important in databases? They ensure data correctness, especially in multi-user or failure-prone environments, like banking systems or inventory updates. 5. What is a save point in a transaction? It's a checkpoint within a transaction. You can roll back to a save point without rolling back the entire transaction. 6. What is auto-commit mode in JDBC? In auto-commit mode, each individual SQL statement is treated as a separate transaction and committed immediately after execution. 7. How do you manage transactions in plain JDBC? Set auto-commit, false, execute statements, then call commit, or rollback, manually. 8. What is a dirty read? It's when a transaction reads uncommitted changes from another transaction, can lead to incorrect results if that transaction rolls back. 9. What is a phantom read? It occurs when a transaction re-executes a query and gets a different result due to another transaction inserting/deleting rows. 10. What is non-repeatable read? It's when a transaction reads the same row twice and gets different values because another transaction modified it in between. 11. What are the transaction isolation levels in SQL? Read_uncommitted. Read_committed. Repeatable_read. Serializable. 12. What problems can each isolation level cause or solve? Read_uncommitted, allows dirty reads. Read_committed, prevents dirty reads. Repeatable_read, prevents dirty plus non-repeatable reads. Serializable, prevents all anomalies, but with performance cost. 13. What is the default isolation level in most databases, like PostgreSQL? Read committed is often the default, which avoids dirty reads but still allows non-repeatable reads and phantom reads. 14. How do you change the isolation level in JDBC? Call connection.setTransactionIsolation, connection.transaction_serializable. 15. Which isolation level provides the strongest consistency? Serializable, it behaves as if transactions run one after another, not concurrently. 16. What is the trade-off when using high isolation levels? Higher isolation improves consistency but reduces performance and increases the risk of deadlocks. 17. What is optimistic locking? It assumes no conflict will happen. You detect conflict at commit time using a version field. 18. What is pessimistic locking? It locks data as soon as it's read to prevent other transactions from modifying it until the current transaction completes. 19. Which is better, optimistic or pessimistic locking? Optimistic, better when conflicts are rare. Pessimistic, better when conflicts are frequent. 20. What is a deadlock in transaction management? When two transactions wait on each other's resources, leading to a situation where neither can proceed. 21. How does Spring manage transactions? Spring provides both declarative, via annotations like at transactional, and programmatic transaction management using Transaction Template or Platform Transaction Manager. 22. What is the at transactional annotation? It's a declarative way to define transactional boundaries. When a method is annotated with at transactional, Spring manages the transaction start, commit, or rollback automatically. 23. Where should you place at transactional? Typically on public methods of service layer classes, not on private methods, because Spring uses proxies that only intercept public method calls. 24. Can you use at transactional on a class? Yes. All public methods inside the class will inherit the transaction behavior. 25. What are common rollback scenarios in Spring? By default, Spring rolls back for unchecked exceptions, runtime exception, error, and commits on checked exceptions unless explicitly configured. 26. How to force rollback on checked exceptions. Use Java. Copy edit. At transactional, rollback for equals your checked exception class. 27. What is the default propagation in Spring transactions? Propagation required, if a transaction exists, join it, otherwise, create a new one. 28. What are Spring's transaction propagation types? Required. Requires _new. Nested. Supports. Not _supported. Never. Mandatory. 29. What's the difference between required and requires _new? Required, joins existing transaction if one exists. Requires _new, always starts a new transaction and suspends the existing one. 30. What is nested propagation? Creates a save point within the existing transaction. If the nested part fails, it can roll back to that save point without rolling back the whole transaction. 31. What are common isolation levels supported by Spring? Default, use is DB default. Read _uncommitted. Read _committed. Repeatable _read. Serializable. 32. How do you set isolation level in Spring? Java. Copy edit. At transactional, isolation equals isolation.serializable. 33. How do you configure timeout for a transaction? Java. Copy edit. At transactional, timeout equals 30/30 seconds. 34. What happens when a transaction timeout is reached? Spring will mark the transaction for rollback and throw a transaction timed out exception. 35. What is the no rollback for attribute in a transactional? You can exclude certain exceptions from causing rollback. Java. Copy edit. At transactional, no rollback for equals custom exception.class. 36. Can you use transactions with Spring Data JPA? Yes, Spring Data repositories are transaction aware. Save methods can be wrapped in at transactional. 37. What happens if you call a transactional method from inside the same class? It won't trigger a proxy-based transaction. This is called self-invocation and should be avoided. 38. How do you enable annotation-based transactions in Spring? Use at enable transaction management on a configuration class. 39. What is Transaction Manager in Spring? An abstraction that manages transaction lifecycles. Implementations exist for JDBC, JPA, Hibernate, etc. 40. How do you manage transactions programmatically in Spring? Use transaction template. Java. Copy edit. Transaction template.execute, status dash. / business logic. Return result. 41. What is the best layer for a transactional? Service layer, because it's responsible for business logic and orchestration. 42. What are common mistakes with a transactional? Annotating private or internal methods. Not handling rollback scenarios. Mixing concerns in transactional code, DB plus remote call. 43. Can you nest at transactional methods? Yes. Spring supports nesting with appropriate propagation, nested or requires _new, but you must understand the implications on rollback. 44. Can you use at transactional with async methods? No, transactions are thread-bound, so using at async or new threads breaks transactional context. 45. Does at transactional work with REST controllers? It's not recommended. REST controllers should be thin and delegate to service classes where a transactional should be used. 46. What's the difference between JDBC and JPA transaction handling in Spring? JDBC uses Data Source Transaction Manager. JPA uses JPA Transaction Manager, integrates with Entity Manager. 47. When would you use programmatic transaction over declarative? When you need dynamic logic, e.g., rollback only under specific business conditions, or need to manage multiple transactions manually. 48. What is a transactional event listener? An event listener that reacts only after a transaction commits successfully. Use at transactional event listener. 49. How do you avoid long-running transactions? Keep transactions short, avoid network calls or user interaction inside a transaction, and use batch operations when possible. 50. What's the difference between logical and physical transactions? Logical, managed by your application, Spring, JPA. Physical, the actual database transaction at the JDBC level. 1. What is Spring Framework? Spring is a lightweight, open-source Java framework that helps build enterprise-level applications. It provides dependency injection, aspect-oriented programming, and a large ecosystem of tools. 2. What are the main features of Spring? Inversion of control, IOC. Dependency injection, DI. Aspect-oriented programming, AOP. MVC Web Framework. Transaction management. Integration with JPA, JDBC, JMS, and more. 3. What is the inversion of control, IOC, principle? IOC means the control of object creation and dependency management is handed over to the framework rather than being coded manually. 4. What is dependency injection, DI? DI is a design pattern where the dependencies of a class are injected by the container rather than the class creating them. 5. What are the types of dependency injection in Spring? Constructor-based injection. Setter-based injection. Field injection, not recommended for production. 6. What is a Spring Bean? A bean is any Java object managed by the Spring IOC container. Beans are defined and instantiated by the container. 7. What is the application context in Spring? Application context is the central interface for accessing beans and configuration. It extends Bean Factory and adds more enterprise features. 8. What is the difference between Bean Factory and application context? Bean Factory is basic and lazy loads beans. Application context is more advanced and eagerly loads beans. 9. What are the different ways to configure Spring Beans? XML configuration. Annotation-based, at component, at bean. Java-based, at configuration classes. 10. What is a Spring configuration class? It's a class annotated with at configuration, used to define beans with methods annotated by at bean. 11. What are the stages of a Spring Bean lifecycle? Instantiate. Populate properties. At post construct or after property set. Bean is ready to use. At pre-destroy or destroy, before shutdown. 12. What is the role of at post-construct and at pre-destroy? They are lifecycle annotations that mark methods to run after bean creation and before bean destruction. 13. How to customize a bean lifecycle. Implement initializing bean, disposable bean, or use init method and destroy method in XML/Java config. 14. What is a singleton bean? It's a bean where only one instance is created per Spring container. It's the default scope. 15. What are the different bean scopes in Spring? Singleton. Prototype. Request, web. Session, web. Application. WebSocket. 16. What is a prototype bean? A new instance is created every time the bean is requested. 17. What is the difference between singleton and prototype beans? Singleton, one shared instance, prototype, new instance each time. 18. What is at scope annotation used for? It defines the scope of a bean, like at scope, prototype. 19. Can a singleton bean depend on a prototype bean? Yes, but it's tricky. Spring injects the prototype only once. Use Object Factory or Provider to get fresh instances. 20. What is lazy initialization of beans? Beans are created only when they are first requested. Use @lazy to enable this behavior. 21. What is annotation-based configuration in Spring? Instead of XML, you use annotations like @component, @autowired, @configuration, and @bean to define and wire beans. 22. What is the role of @component? @component marks a class as a Spring-managed bean, eligible for component scanning and dependency injection. 23. What's the difference between @component, @service, @repository, and @controller? They are all specializations of @component. @service marks a service layer bean. @repository indicates a DAO and enables exception translation. @controller used in Spring MVC to handle HTTP requests. 24. How does Spring find @component beans? Using component scanning, you specify base packages with @component scan. 25. What is @autowired used for? It injects dependencies automatically by type from the Spring container. 26. What is the difference between @autowired and @inject? Both inject dependencies, but @autowired is from Spring. @inject is from JSR 330, Java standard. Less Spring specific. 27. What is @qualifier used for? When multiple beans of the same type exist, @qualifier helps specify which one to inject. Java. Copy edit. @autowired. @qualifier, myBean. Private service. 28. How to inject values from application properties into a bean. Use @value, $property.name, or use @configuration properties. 29. What does the @bean annotation do? It defines a bean in a Java @configuration class. Java. Copy edit. @bean. Public myService. Return new myService impl. 30. Can you use both @component and @bean? Yes, @component is for auto detection, @bean is for manual bean definitions in a @configuration class. 31. What is an application context in Spring? It's the central container interface that manages beans, resources, events, and internationalization. 32. What is the difference between application context and web application context? Web application context is a specialized version of application context for web applications. It integrates with servlet context and MVC. 33. How do you handle multiple environments in Spring, e.g., dev, prod? Use Spring profiles, annotate beans with @profile, dev, and activate with spring.profiles.active equals dev. 34. What is @primary annotation? It tells Spring which bean to inject when multiple candidates exist. Java. Copy edit. At primary. At bean. Public service main service. 35. What is aspect-oriented programming, AOP? AOP allows you to modularize cross-cutting concerns like logging, security, or transactions, without polluting business logic. 36. What are the main AOP concepts? Aspect, a module like logging. Join point during execution, e.g., method call. Advice, action taken, e.g., before method. Point cut, expression to match join points. Weaving, applying aspects to code. 37. What is at aspect and at around in Spring AOP? At aspect marks a class containing AOP logic. At around wraps method execution, you can control before and after behavior. 38. What are the types of advices in Spring AOP? At before. At after. At after returning. At after throwing. At around. 39. What is the difference between Spring AOP and Aspect J? Spring AOP uses proxies, runtime, method level only. Aspect J is more powerful, compile time, field level, constructor, etc. 40. Can Spring AOP work with private methods? No. Spring AOP is proxy-based, so it only works on public methods of proxied beans. 41. What is circular dependency in Spring? It happens when bean A depends on bean B, and B also depends on A. Spring resolves some of these using proxies or setter injection. 42. How to resolve circular dependency issues. Use setter injection instead of constructor injection. Break the dependency. Use at lazy on one of the beans. 43. What is the difference between eager and lazy loading in Spring? Eager, bean is created at startup. Lazy, bean is created only when needed, at lazy. 44. What is factory bean in Spring? It's a special bean that creates other beans. It allows custom instantiation logic. 45. What is at depends on? It forces Spring to load one bean before another. Java. Copy edit. At depends on, bean A. At component. Public class bean B. 46. How does Spring manage exceptions during bean initialization? It throws bean creation exception if a bean fails to initialize. 47. Can Spring Core work without Spring Boot? Yes, Spring Core is independent of Spring Boot. You can build applications using only Spring Framework with manual setup. 48. What is environment in Spring? It provides access to properties, profiles, and system variables at runtime. 49. What is at configuration properties? It binds external configuration, like application.yml, to a POJO, useful for managing structured config. 50. What are best practices when working with Spring Core? Keep beans stateless. Use constructor injection. Use profiles to isolate environments. Avoid field injection in production. Modularize using interfaces and components. 1. What is Spring MVC? Spring MVC is a web framework in the Spring ecosystem that follows the Model View Controller pattern. It separates business logic, UI, and user input handling, making the application cleaner and more testable. 2. What are the main components of Spring MVC? Dispatcher Servlet, Front Controller. Controller, handles requests. Model, carries data. View, renders the response. Handler mapping, view resolver. 3. What is Dispatcher Servlet? It's the central servlet in Spring MVC. It receives incoming HTTP requests, delegates them to controllers, and returns responses through views. 4. How does request mapping work in Spring MVC? We use at request mapping or its variants like at get mapping, at post mapping, etc., to map a URL to a specific controller method. 5. What is at rest controller in Spring? At rest controller is a combination of at controller and at response body. It tells Spring to serialize return values into JSON or XML instead of rendering a view. 6. How do you return JSON from a controller in Spring? Just annotate your controller with @REST_controller and return an object. Spring uses Jackson, by default, to convert it to JSON. 7. What is the difference between @controller and @REST_controller? @controller is used for web pages, views. @REST_controller is used for REST APIs, JSON/XML response. 8. What is model and view? It's a Spring object that holds both model data and view name, used in traditional MVC, not REST. 9. How do you pass data to a view in Spring MVC? You can use model, model map, or model and view. For example, Java. Copy edit. Model.add attribute, name, John. 10. What is @model attribute used for? It binds request parameters to a model object and also makes that object available in the view layer. 11. What is @requestParam? It binds a query parameter or form parameter to a method argument. Java. Copy edit. @getMapping, /greet. Public string greet, @requestParam string name. 12. What is @path variable? It binds a URI path variable to a method parameter. Java. Copy edit. @getMapping, /user/id. Public user getUser, @path variable long id. 13. What is @requestBody? It binds the HTTP request body, usually JSON, to a Java object. Java. Copy edit. @postMapping, /user. Public void create user, @requestBody user. 14. What is @responseBody? It tells Spring to write the returned object directly to the HTTP response body, usually as JSON. 15. How do you validate request payloads in Spring? Use @valid or @validated annotations in combination with Java Bean validation annotations like @notNull, @size, etc. 16. What happens if validation fails in Spring MVC? Spring will throw a method argument not valid exception, which you can handle with @exceptionHandler or @controller advice. 17. What is the difference between @valid and @validated? @valid comes from JSR 303, javax.validation. @validated is Spring's version, which supports validation groups. 18. How do you handle file uploads in Spring MVC? Use multipart file in controller. Java. Copy edit. @postMapping, /upload. Public string upload, @requestParam multipart file. 19. How do you return a custom HTTP status in Spring? Use response entity. Java. Copy edit. Return response entity.status, HTTP status.created.body, result. 20. How do you send a response with no content? 204. Return. Java. Copy edit. Return response entity.nocontent.build. 21. How do you handle exceptions in Spring MVC? Use @exceptionHandler for local handling or @controller advice for global exception handling across controllers. 22. What is @exceptionHandler? It handles specific exceptions thrown by controller methods. Java. Copy edit. @exceptionHandler, entity-not-found-exception.class. Public response entity string handle not found, entity not found exception X. Return response entity.status, HTTP status.not_found.body, X get message. 23. What is @controller advice? It's a centralized class to handle exceptions, bind model data, or apply logic to all controllers globally. 24. What is response entity exception handler? It's a Spring-provided base class you can extend to customize standard error responses, like for @valid validation failures. 25. What is a filter in Spring? A filter is a servlet-level component that intercepts all requests before reaching controllers, good for logging, authentication, or cross-cutting concerns. 26. How do you register a filter in Spring Boot? By implementing filter and annotating with that component, or by using filter registration bean in a config class. 27. What is the difference between a filter and an interceptor? Filter works at the servlet level, outside of Spring. Interceptor works at the Spring MVC level and is more aware of Spring context. 28. How do you use interceptors in Spring MVC? Implement handler interceptor and override methods like prehandle, then register the interceptor using WebMVC configurer. 29. What's the difference between prehandle and posthandle in an interceptor? Prehandle runs before the controller. Posthandle runs after controller execution but before the view renders. 30. When would you use a filter versus an interceptor? Use filters for cross-cutting concerns across all servlets, e.g., SURIS, encoding. Use interceptors for Spring-specific logic like auth checks, logging controller input-output. 31. How does Spring handle content negotiation? Spring checks accept headers, URL extensions, or parameters to return the correct content type, JSON, XML, etc. 32. How do you force Spring to always return JSON? Set produces equals application/JSON in the controller method or configure content negotiation configurer. 33. How do you return custom headers in a response? Use response entity and set headers manually. Java. Copy edit. HTTP headers equals new HTTP headers. Headers.add, xcustom, value. Return new response entity, body, headers, http status.ok. 34. What is HTOAS in Spring REST? HTOAS, hypermedia as the engine of application state, enriches REST responses with links to related resources using Spring HTOAS. 35. How do you add links using Spring HTOAS? Use the entity model class and add links like Java. Copy edit. Entity model user model equals entity model.of, user. Model.add, link to, method on, user controller.class, .get user, id, .with selfrel. 36. What is a cross-origin? It enables SORS for a method or controller. Java. Copy edit. At cross-origin, origins equals http://example.com. At getMapping, /data. 37. How do you secure a REST API with Spring Security? Use at preauthorize, JWT tokens, and configure HTTP security in a security filter chain. 38. What is WebMVC configurer? An interface that allows you to customize MVC configuration, for SURIS, interceptors, message converters, etc. 39. How do you return custom error responses for validation failures? Extend response entity exception handler and override handle method argument not valid to customize the body. 40. What is HTTP message converter in Spring? It's a component that converts Java objects to, from HTTP request/response body, like JSON, XML, etc. 41. What is I-18N in Spring MVC? It stands for internationalization. You can use message bundles, like messages_n.properties, and message source to support multiple languages. 42. How do you configure I-18N in Spring? Declare a resource bundle message source bean, then access messages using it auto-wired message source or in views. 43. What is a locale resolver? It determines the user's locale, based on session, cookies, or HTTP headers. 44. How do you test Spring MVC controllers? Use at WebMVC test with mockMVC to test controllers in isolation. Java. Copy edit. mockMVC.perform, get/hello. .unexpect, status, .is okay. .unexpect, content, .string, hello. 45. What is mockMVC? It's a Spring testing tool that simulates HTTP requests to controllers, without starting a real server. 46. What's the difference between at WebMVC test and at Spring Boot test? At WebMVC test, tests only MVC layer, controller plus advice. At Spring Boot test, loads the full application context. 47. How do you handle exceptions in integration tests? Use mock MVC to simulate errors and verify response status, body, and message. 48. What is the best practice for designing REST endpoints? Use resource-oriented URLs, nouns, proper HTTP verbs, get, post, put, delete, and appropriate status codes. 49. Should you throw exceptions from controller methods? Yes, but catch and translate them using a controller advice for a clean response structure. 50. What are common mistakes in Spring MVC development? Overusing at REST controller instead of separating concerns. Not validating input. Not handling exceptions. Mixing business logic with controller code. Ignoring content negotiation and status codes. 1. What is Spring Security? Spring Security is a powerful and customizable authentication and authorization framework. It helps protect Java applications by enforcing login, access rules, and secure integration with OAuth, JWT, LDAP, and more. 2. What are the main features of Spring Security? Authentication and authorization. Protection against CSRF, SRS, session fixation. Secure password hashing. Role-based access control. Integration with JWT, OAuth 2, SAML, LDAP. 3. What is the difference between authentication and authorization? Authentication verifies who the user is, e.g., username and password. Authorization checks what the user is allowed to do, e.g., access to resources or roles. 4. How does Spring Security authenticate a user? It uses an authentication manager to verify credentials, typically through a user detail service that loads user data and a password encoder that verifies the password. 5. What is user details and user detail service? User details is an interface that holds user info, username, password, roles. User detail service loads user details from a database or other source. 6. What is a password encoder? It's an interface that encodes passwords for secure storage and matches raw passwords during login. Common types include bcrypt password encoder. 7. What is a security filter chain? It's a chain of filters that intercepts HTTP requests. These filters handle login, logout, session management, and access control. 8. How do you configure Spring Security in Spring Boot 3 or 6? Use a security filter chain bean in a at configuration class. Java. Copy edit. At bean. Security filter chain, HTTP security HTTP, throws exception. http.authorize HTTP requests, auth-auth.anyrequest.authenticated. .form login. Return http.build. 9. What is CSRF protection and how is it enabled in Spring Security? CSRF, cross-site request forgery. Protection ensures that malicious sites cannot perform actions on behalf of authenticated users. It is enabled by default for stateful web applications. 10. How do you disable CSRF protection? In stateless APIs, you may disable it like this. Java. Copy edit. http.csrf, csrf-csrf.disable. 11. How do you define access rules in Spring Security? You define access rules using .authorize HTTP requests or .authorize requests. Java. Copy edit. http.authorize HTTP requests, auth-auth. .request matchers, /admin/**, .has role, admin. .request matchers, /user/**, has any role, user, admin. Any request, authenticated. 12. What is the difference between has role and has authority? Has role, admin, means the user must have role_admin authority. Has authority, role_admin, checks the exact authority string. 13. What is the default role prefix in Spring Security? By default, roles are prefixed with role_. So has role, admin, checks for role_admin. 14. How do you define a custom login page? You can customize the login page using Java. Copy edit. http://form-login, form-form. .login page, /login. .permit all. 15. How does Spring Security handle logout? It provides a default /logout endpoint that invalidates the session, clears cookies, and redirects to login. 16. What is a filter in Spring Security? Filters are the building blocks of Spring Security. They intercept requests before reaching the controller and apply security logic like login, authentication, and exception handling. 17. What is once per request filter? It's a base class for custom filters that guarantees the filter runs only once per request, useful for adding JWT or logging logic. 18. What is the order of filters in Spring Security? Spring Security uses a delegating filter chain with predefined order. For example, Security Context Persistence Filter, Username Password Authentication Filter, Basic Authentication Filter, Exception Translation Filter, Filter Security Interceptor. 19. How do you register a custom filter? You can add it to the filter chain using Java. Copy edit. http://add-filter before, myFilter, username password authentication filter.class. 20. How do you secure REST APIs with Spring Security? Disable CSRF. Make the session stateless. Authenticate with JWT or OAuth 2. Use @preauthorize for method-level access. 21. What is JWT? JWT, JSON Web Token, is a compact token format used for stateless authentication. It contains user info and a signature for verification. 22. How does Spring Security work with JWT? Authenticate user with username, password. Generate JWT and return it to the client. On each request, extract and validate the JWT in a custom filter. Set authentication in security context. 23. What are the components of a JWT? Header, algorithm and type. Payload, user info, claims. Signature, verifies the token integrity. 24. Where do you store JWT on the client side? Usually in the authorization header as a bearer token. Makefile. Copy edit. Authorization, bearer EYJHBJOI. 25. How do you validate a JWT in Spring? Check the signature. Verify the expiration time. Extract user info, subject, roles. 26. What happens if the JWT is expired? Spring Security will reject the request. You can handle this gracefully in your filter or exception handler. 27. How do you issue JWT in Spring Security? After successful login, generate a token using a library like JJWT, and return it to the client. 28. How do you make Spring stateless for JWT-based APIs? Java. Copy edit. http://sessionmanagement, session-session.session-creation-policy, session-creation-policy.stateless. 29. What are common JWT security best practices? Use short expiration times. Sign with a strong secret. Avoid storing sensitive data in the token. Use HTTPS. 30. What is the difference between session-based and token-based authentication? Session-based, server stores session info, good for web apps. Token-based, client stores token, e.g., JWT, better for REST APIs and mobile apps. 31. What is OAuth 2? OAuth 2 is an authorization protocol that allows third-party applications to access user data without sharing passwords. It issues tokens to authenticate and authorize API requests securely. 32. How does OAuth 2 work in Spring Security? Spring Security provides support for both resource servers, API backends that validate tokens, and authorization servers, that issue tokens. You configure them using Spring Security and Spring Authorization Server. 33. What is the difference between OAuth 2 Authorization Server and Resource Server? Authorization Server handles user login and token issuance. Resource Server verifies tokens and protects resources, like REST APIs. 34. What is OpenID Connect, OIDC? OIDC is an identity layer on top of OAuth 2. It provides login and profile information using tokens, like ID token, in addition to access tokens. 35. How do you secure an endpoint using OAuth 2 Resource Server? Add Spring, Boot, Starter, OAuth 2 Resource Server and configure JWT validation. Java. Copy edit. http://OAuth2 Resource Server, OAuth2-OAuth2.jwt. 36. What is at Enable Method Security, or at Enable Global Method Security? It enables method-level security using annotations like at Preauthorize, at Secured, and at Roles Allowed. 37. What does at Preauthorize do? It runs before method execution and checks access. Java. Copy edit. At Preauthorize, has role, admin. Public void delete user. 38. What's the difference between at Preauthorize and at Secured? At Preauthorize supports SPL expressions. At Secured is simpler and only supports roles. 39. Can you combine at Preauthorize with custom expressions? Yes, for example. Java. Copy edit. At Preauthorize, #user.id == authentication.principal.id. This ensures that the user can only access their own data. 40. How do you get the currently authenticated user in a method? You can use security context holder or inject the principal. Java. Copy edit. Authentication auth = security context holder.get context.get authentication. Or in a controller. Java. Copy edit. At get mapping, /me. Public string getMe, principal. Return principal.getName. 41. What are best practices for securing REST APIs in Spring? Use HTTPS. Use JWT for stateless authentication. Apply fine-grained access control, at Preauthorize. Avoid exposing sensitive data. Rotate and encrypt secrets. 42. How do you store passwords securely in Spring? Always hash passwords using a strong algorithm like bcrypt via bcrypt password encoder. 43. What is security context and how is it used? It holds security information about the current user, e.g., authentication token. Spring stores it in a thread local variable per request. 44. Can you customize authentication in Spring Security? Yes, you can provide a custom authentication provider, custom login page, or even implement your own filter for token authentication. 45. What is authentication provider? It is responsible for authenticating a request. Spring provides DAO authentication provider by default, but you can create your own. 46. How do you use multi-factor authentication, MFA, in Spring Security? You can extend the authentication flow using filters to add a second verification step, like OTP or email confirmation. 47. How do you manage user sessions in Spring Security? You can configure session policies, timeout rules, and limit concurrent sessions. Java. Copy edit. http://sessionmanagement.maximum sessions, 1. Max sessions prevents login, true. 48. What is session fixation and how does Spring prevent it? Session fixation is a security attack where a malicious user sets a known session ID. Spring prevents this by generating a new session ID after login. 49. What is security context persistence filter? It stores and restores the security context across requests. It's one of the first filters in the chain. 50. How do you test Spring security configurations? Use with mock user, with user details, or mock MVC with test authentication. You can simulate login and test protected endpoints. 1. What is Spring Boot? Spring Boot is a framework that helps you build Spring-based applications quickly and easily. It eliminates a lot of boilerplate by providing auto-configuration, embedded servers, and production-ready features out of the box. 2. What are the main advantages of using Spring Boot? Fast development with minimal setup. Auto-configuration. Embedded web servers, like Tomcat or Jetty. No XML configuration required. Built-in support for monitoring and metrics with Actuator. Easy integration with Spring ecosystem. 3. What is the purpose of Spring Boot application? Spring Boot application is a combination of 3 annotations configuration, enable auto configuration, and component scan. It marks the main class and starts the Spring Boot application. 4. How do you run a Spring Boot application? You can run it using the main method with Spring application.run. The Spring Boot Maven or Gradle plugin. Java, jar urap.jar on the command line. 5. What is auto-configuration in Spring Boot? Spring Boot automatically configures beans based on the dependencies and class path. For example, if Spring Boot Starter Web is present, it auto-configures a dispatcher servlet and Tomcat. 6. How do you disable a specific auto-configuration? Use Spring Boot application, exclude equals some auto-configuration.class, or enable auto-configuration, exclude equals. 7. What is a Spring Boot starter? A starter is a pre-configured set of dependencies. For example, Spring Boot Starter Web includes Spring MVC, Tomcat, and Jackson. 8. What starters have you used in your projects? Some common ones I've used include Spring Boot Starter Web, Spring Boot Starter Data JPA, Spring Boot Starter Security, Spring Boot Starter Test, Spring Boot Starter Validation. 9. What is the role of application.properties or application.yml? It's the configuration file where you define settings like server port, database connection, logging levels, etc. 10. How do you change the server port in Spring Boot? Add this to application.properties. Properties. Copy edit. Server.port equals 8081. 11. What are Spring Boot profiles? Profiles allow you to define different configurations for different environments like dev, test, or prod. Use profile on beans or activate profiles with properties. Copy edit. Spring.profiles.active equals dev. 12. How do you load a different config file for each profile? Use files like applicationdev.yml, applicationprod.yml, and Spring will load them based on the active profile. 13. What is Spring Boot Actuator? It provides production-ready features like health checks, metrics, environment info, and monitoring endpoints. 14. How do you enable Actuator endpoints? Add the dependency XML. Copy edit. Dependency group id org.springframework.boot/group id. Artifact ID a Spring Boot Starter Actuator /artifact ID /dependency. Then access endpoints like /actuator/health. 15. How do you expose specific actuator endpoints? In application.properties. Properties. Copy edit. Management.endpoints.web.exposure.include equals health info. 16. How do you secure actuator endpoints? You can use Spring Security to restrict access to endpoints using roles or tokens. 17. What is a command line runner in Spring Boot? It's an interface that runs logic after the application context is loaded. Useful for initializing data. 18. What is a at bean? It marks a method that returns a Spring-managed component. Beans are added to the application context and can be injected elsewhere. 19. What is the difference between at component and at bean? At component is placed on the class. At bean is used in a at configuration class to manually define and return a bean. 20. How do you externalize configuration in Spring Boot? Spring Boot supports external properties from files, environment variables, command line arguments, or cloud config servers. 21. How do you customize error responses in Spring Boot? You can create a class annotated with at controller advice and override methods from response entity exception handler. For example, Java. Copy edit. At exception handler, entity not found exception.class. Public response entity string handle not found, entity not found exception X. Return response entity.status, http status.not_found.body, X get message. 22. How do you return a custom error page? Create an HTML file like error/404.html or error/500.html inside src/main/resources/templates. 23. What is error controller in Spring Boot? It lets you define custom logic for handling all errors in one place by overriding the getErrorPath method, Spring Boot 2.x, or mapping /error directly, in newer versions. 24. How do you configure logging in Spring Boot? Spring Boot uses logback by default. You can customize logging in application.properties. Properties. Copy edit. Logging.level.org.springframework.web equals debug. Logging.file.name equals app. Log. 25. How do you log JSON messages in Spring Boot? Use a structured logging library like log/logback encoder or integrate with SLF4j and configure JSON format in logback_spring.xml. 26. What's the difference between at REST controller and at controller? At REST controller combines at controller and at response body, so it returns data, usually JSON. At controller is used for rendering views like JSP or TimeLeaf. 27. How does Spring Boot support dependency injection? Spring Boot uses Spring Core's IOC container. You can inject beans using at autowired, constructor injection, or at bean definitions. 28. What is constructor injection and why is it preferred? Constructor injection ensures that dependencies are provided at creation time. It's more testable, safer, no nulls, and supports immutability. 29. What is at value in Spring Boot? It allows you to inject values from properties. Java. Copy edit. At value, $app title. Private string title. 30. How do you use configuration properties with a POJO? Use at configuration properties with at enable configuration properties. Java. Copy edit. At component. At configuration properties, prefix equals app. Public class app config. Private string title. //getters/setters. 31. How do you test a Spring Boot application? Use at Spring Boot test for integration tests and at WebMVC test or at DataJPA test for unit tests on specific layers. 32. What is at Spring Boot test? It loads the full application context. Good for end-to-end or integration testing of multiple components together. 33. What is at WebMVC test? It loads only the web layer, controllers plus related config, for fast testing of HTTP endpoints using mockMVC. 34. How do you mock beans in a test? Use at mock bean to replace a real bean with a mock for the test context. 35. What is test REST template? It's a convenient way to test REST APIs and integration tests, like an HTTP client inside your test code. 36. What is Spring Boot DevTools? It improves developer productivity by enabling hot reload, automatic restart, and live reload in development mode. 37. How do you enable automatic restart in DevTools? Just add the Spring Boot DevTools dependency. It will detect changes in class path and restart the app automatically. 38. What is Spring Boot Starter Test? It's a comprehensive starter that includes JUnit, Mockito, Handcrest, AssertJ, and Spring Test, everything needed for testing. 39. What is the difference between unit tests and integration tests in Spring Boot? Unit tests test individual components, controllers, services, in isolation. Integration tests test end-to-end flow including context, DB, and services. 40. How do you test exception handling in controllers? Use mock MVC with web MVC test and verify error responses using .unexpect, status, .is bad request. 41. How do you secure a Spring Boot application? Add Spring Boot Starter Security, configure your security filter chain, and use @preauthorize, JWT tokens, or login forms depending on the app type. 42. How do you add CRS support in Spring Boot? You can allow cross-origin requests using cross-origin on controllers or configure global CRS in WebMVC Configurer. 43. How do you deploy a Spring Boot application? You can run it as a standalone JR. Deploy to a server like Tomcat, as war. Package into a Docker container. Deploy to the cloud, e.g., AWS, GCP. 44. How do you create a Docker image for a Spring Boot app? Use a simple Docker file. Docker file. Copy edit. From OpenJDK, 17. Copy target /app_jar. entry java, jar, /app_jar. 45. What is a fat JR in Spring Boot? A fat JR, or Uber JR, includes your app code and all required dependencies in one file, ready to run with Java, jar. 46. How do you monitor a Spring Boot application? Use actuator endpoints like /actuator/metrics, /health, and /Prometheus, and integrate with tools like Prometheus plus Grafana. 47. How do you enable Prometheus metrics? Add micrometer plus Prometheus dependencies and expose /actuator/Prometheus. 48. What is Spring Application Builder? It's a Fluent API used to create and customize Spring application, useful when building parent-child contexts or customizing startup. 49. What is Graceful Shutdown in Spring Boot? From Spring Boot 2.3+, Graceful Shutdown allows ongoing requests to complete before the app fully stops. Enable it with Properties. Copy edit. Server.shutdown equals graceful. 50. What are common performance optimizations in Spring Boot? Use connection pooling, e.g., Hikari CP. Enable lazy initialization. Avoid reflection-heavy libraries. Tune actuator metrics. Minimize classpath scanning. 1. What is Spring Data JPA? Spring Data JPA is a part of the Spring ecosystem that simplifies working with JPA-based repositories. It removes boilerplate code and allows developers to define queries by method names or annotations. 2. What is the difference between JPA and Spring Data JPA? JPA is a specification for ORM in Java. Spring Data JPA is a library that implements and extends JPA, providing additional features like custom query generation and repository interfaces. 3. What are the main repository interfaces provided by Spring Data JPA? JPA Repository (TID), a full-featured interface for CRUD and pagination. CRUD Repository (TID), basic CRUD operations. Paging and Sorting Repository (TID), CRUD plus pagination and sorting. 4. How does Spring Data JPA create queries from method names? It parses the method name using naming conventions like find by username, find by email and status, and creates SQL or JPQL automatically. 5. What is the use of @query annotation? @query allows you to define custom JPQL or native SQL queries directly. Java. Copy edit. @query, select you from user u where u.email equals 1. User find by email, string email. 6. How do you execute native SQL queries in Spring Data JPA? You can add native query equals true to the @query annotation. Java. Copy edit. @query, value equals, select asterisk from users where email equals 1, native query equals true. User find by email native, string email. 7. What is the difference between JPQL and native SQL? JPQL works with entities and is database independent. Native SQL works directly with database tables and syntax. 8. What is the purpose of modifying? When executing update or delete operations using @query, you must mark the method with @modifying. Java. Copy edit. @modifying. @query, update user u set u.active equals false where u.id equals 1. Void deactivate user, long id. 9. How does pagination work in Spring Data JPA? You pass a pageable object to the repository method, and it returns a page t. Object with content, page info, and total elements. 10. What's the difference between findAll and findAll, pageable? FindAll returns a full list. FindAll, pageable, returns only a portion, a page, and includes metadata like total elements and pages. 11. What are the main types of entity relationships in JPA? There are 4 key relationships. @one-to-one. @one-to-many. @many-to-one. @many-to-many. Each maps a Java object relationship to database foreign key relationships. 12. What is the difference between mapped by and @join column? Mapped by is used on the inverse side of the relationship to indicate that the other entity owns the mapping. @join column defines the foreign key column on the owning side. 13. What is lazy versus eager fetching in JPA? Lazy, associated entities are loaded only when accessed. Eager, all related entities are fetched immediately. By default, @many-to-one and @one-to-one are eager, @one-to-many and @many-to-many are lazy. 14. What are the drawbacks of eager fetching? Eager fetching can lead to performance issues, especially n+1 queries and loading unnecessary data even if it's not used. 15. How do you solve the n+1 problem in JPA? You can use join fetch in JPQL. Java. Copy edit. @query, select you from user u join fetch you. Roles. List user find all with roles. 16. What is a bidirectional relationship and when should you use it? A bidirectional relationship allows navigation from both sides of an association, e.g., a user has orders, and each order knows its user. It helps with business logic and object graph traversal but requires careful mapping to avoid infinite loops. 17. What is Entity Manager in JPA? It's the main interface to interact with the persistence context. You can use it to persist, remove, find, and flush entities manually. 18. How do you inject Entity Manager in Spring? You can inject it using a persistence context. Java. Copy edit. @persistence context. Private Entity Manager. 19. What is the difference between persist and merge in JPA? Persist is used for new entities. Merge is used to update detached entities and return a managed copy. 20. What is the lifecycle of a JPA entity? There are 4 states. New, not yet persisted. Managed, in persistence context. Detached, previously persisted, now unmanaged. Removed, marked for deletion. 21. What is a DTO projection in Spring Data JPA? DTO, Data Transfer Object, projection lets you map query results directly to a custom Java object instead of an entity, improving performance and avoiding lazy loading issues. 22. How do you define a constructor-based DTO projection? You write a JPQL query that returns selected fields and map it to a class with a matching constructor. Java. Copy edit. At query, select new com.example.dto.userdto, u.id, u.name, from user u. List user DTO of find user DTOs. 23. What is an interface-based projection in Spring Data JPA? You define an interface with getters that match the query result fields. Java. Copy edit. Public interface user view. String getName. String getEmail. Then your method can return list user view and Spring will project the result. 24. What are the benefits of using DTOs instead of entities? Improves performance by fetching only needed data. Prevents lazy loading exceptions outside the transaction. Avoids exposing internal entity structures. 25. What is a specification in Spring Data JPA? A specification T is a type-safe way to build dynamic queries using the Criteria API. It's useful when filtering by multiple optional fields. 26. What is Query by Example, QBE? QBE lets you create a probe, an example entity, and search based on its non-null values. It's useful for simple filters without custom queries. 27. What is the benefit of using at transactional and repository/service layers? At transactional ensures that all operations within the method are executed in a single transaction, providing rollback in case of failure and ensuring consistency. 28. How do you monitor the SQL queries generated by Spring Data JPA? Enable logging in application.properties. Properties. Copy edit. Spring.jpa.showSQL equals true. Spring.jpa.properties.hibernate.format_SQL equals true. Logging.level.org.hibernate.SQL equals debug. 29. What is dirty checking in JPA? Dirty checking is when JPA automatically tracks changes to managed entities and updates the database at flush time without explicitly calling an update. 30. What are common performance issues in JPA and how do you solve them? N+1 problem: use join fetch. Unnecessary eager loading: switch to lazy. Large result sets: use pagination. Heavy updates: use DTOs or bulk update queries. 31. What is JPA auditing and how do you enable it in Spring Boot? JPA auditing allows automatic tracking of entity changes like created date, last modified date, created by, and modified by. To enable it, add at Enable JPA Auditing in a config class. Add at Entity Listeners, auditing entity listener.class, to your entity. Use annotations at created date, at last modified date, etc. 32. How do you implement soft delete in Spring Data JPA? Instead of deleting a row from the database, soft delete marks it as deleted using a flag like isDeleted. Example. Java. Copy edit. At column, name equals deleted. Private boolean deleted. Then update your queries to filter out deleted records. 33. How do you automatically exclude soft deleted records from all queries? Use at where from Hibernate. Java. Copy edit. At where, clause equals, deleted equals false. Or build global filters using JPA specification executor. 34. What are the inheritance strategies in JPA? JPA supports 3 strategies for mapping inheritance. Single_table, all classes in one table. Joined, normalized, parent-child in separate tables. Table_per_class, one table per class, less common. 35. Which JPA inheritance strategy is best for performance? Single underscore table is the fastest because it avoids joins but may include many null columns. Use it when subclass fields are sparse or similar. 36. What is at mapped superclass in JPA? It defines a superclass whose fields are inherited by subclasses, but it's not an entity and doesn't map to its own table. 37. How does flush work in JPA? Flush pushes changes from the persistence context to the database. It doesn't commit the transaction, that happens on commit. You can use it to force updates before running a query. 38. How can you batch insert or update entities in JPA? Use Entity Manager to persist in chunks and call flush and clear after each batch. You can also configure hibernate batching. Properties. Copy edit. Spring.jpa.properties.hibernate.jdbc.batch_size equals 30. 39. What are the risks of using large entity graphs? Performance issues from loading too much data. Serialization issues with circular references. Complexity in managing cascades and relationships. 40. How do you profile and optimize JPA performance? Use tools like Hibernate Statistics, JProfiler, or Actuator Metrics. Log-generated SQL. Measure query time and adjust indexes. Switch to DTOs or native queries when needed. 41. What is optimistic locking in JPA? It uses a version field, like at version, to detect concurrent updates. If another transaction modified the record, a optimistic lock exception is thrown. 42. How do you implement optimistic locking? Add a version field in the entity. Java. Copy edit. At version. Private integer version. 43. What is pessimistic locking? It locks the database row immediately when accessed, preventing other transactions from reading or writing it. Use at lock mode type.pessimistic_write. 44. When should you use pessimistic versus optimistic locking? Use optimistic when conflicts are rare, better performance. Use pessimistic when conflicts are likely or you need stricter data consistency. 45. How do you execute bulk update or delete in Spring Data JPA? Use at modifying plus at query for custom DML. Java. Copy edit. At modifying. At query, update product p set p.price equals price where p.category equals category. Void update price by category, at param, price. Big decimal price, at param, category, string category. 46. What happens if you bulk update entities without flushing the persistence context? The changes won't be visible to the current persistence context unless you clear or refresh it. This can lead to stale data issues. 47. How do you execute dynamic queries in Spring Data JPA? Use JPA Specification Executor. Criteria API. Query DSL, optional. They allow building queries at runtime based on conditions. 48. How do you implement multi-tenancy in Spring Data JPA? Common strategies. Use separate schemas per tenant. Add a tenant_ID column to all tables and filter by it. You can use Hibernate interceptors or filters to apply the tenant context. 49. How do you audit user actions in entities, created by, modified by? Implement auditor-aware T to return the current user. Java. Copy edit. Public class auditor-aware implements auditor-aware string. Public optional string get current auditor. Return optional. Of security context holder .get context, .get authentication, .get name. 50. What are some best practices for using Spring Data JPA? Prefer constructor-based DTOs for read operations. Use pagination for large queries. Avoid eager loading unless necessary. Use transactions wisely. Monitor and log SQL queries. Understand your database structure, indexes, joins, etc. 1. What is a REST API? A REST API, representational state transfer, is a way for applications to communicate over HTTP using standard methods like GET, POST, PUT, and DELETE. It treats everything as a resource, represented by URLs, and responses are usually in JSON or XML. 2. What are the key principles of REST? REST is based on statelessness, client-server architecture, uniform interface, cacheable responses, layered system, resource identification using URIs. 3. What HTTP methods do you use in a REST API? GET, fetch data. POST, create new resource. PUT, update an existing resource. Patch, partially update. Delete, remove a resource. 4. What is the difference between PUT and patch? PUT replaces the entire resource. Patch modifies only the fields provided. 5. What is idempotency, and which methods are idempotent? Idempotency means that no matter how many times you call the method, the result stays the same. Get, put, delete are idempotent. POST is not. 6. What status codes do you commonly use in REST APIs? 200 OK, success. 201 created, resource created. 204 no content, successful, no body. 400 bad request, invalid input. 401 unauthorized, authentication required. 403 forbidden, no permission. 404 not found, resource doesn't exist. 500 internal server error, unexpected error. 7. What is the purpose of HTTP headers in a REST API? Headers carry metadata like content type, authentication, authorization, and caching info, cache control. 8. What is the difference between 401 and 403? 401 means the user is unauthenticated. 403 means the user is authenticated but not authorized to access the resource. 9. What is HDOAS in REST? HDOAS, hypermedia as the engine of application state, means that a REST response should include links to other actions the client can take. It makes APIs more discoverable and self-descriptive. 10. What is content negotiation in REST APIs? Content negotiation allows clients to request different formats, like JSON, XML, by using headers like accept. The server returns the format the client asks for. 11. How do you build a RESTful API in Spring Boot? You use the @REST controller annotation to expose endpoints and define mappings with @get mapping, @post mapping, @put mapping, and @delete mapping. Spring Boot handles JSON conversion automatically via Jackson. 12. What's the difference between @REST controller and @controller? @REST controller combines @controller and @response body, so it returns JSON or XML directly. @controller is used for serving web pages and usually returns view templates. 13. How do you map a get endpoint with path variables in Spring Boot? Java. Copy edit. @get mapping, /users/id. Public response entity user get user, @path variable long id. @path variable binds the value from the URL path to the method parameter. 14. How do you accept a request body in a POST endpoint? You use @request body to bind the JSON request payload to a Java object. Java. Copy edit. @post mapping, /users. Public response entity user create user, @request body user user. 15. How do you validate input in a REST API? Use @valid with validation annotations like @not blank, @size, etc., in your DTO, and annotate the method parameter. Java. Copy edit. Public response entity user create, @valid @request body user DTO. 16. What happens when validation fails? Spring throws a method argument not valid exception. You can handle this globally using @controller advice to return a custom error response. 17. how do you return a standardized error response? Create a custom error class and use at exception handler or at controller advice to catch exceptions and return a consistent structure. Java. Copy edit. Public class AP error. Private string message. Private int status. Private instant timestamp. 18. How do you handle exceptions globally in Spring Boot? Use at controller advice and define methods with at exception handler to catch and customize exceptions across your API. 19. What is response entity in Spring? It's a wrapper that lets you return HTTP status codes, headers, and body in one response. Java. Copy edit. Return response entity.status, HTTP status.created.body, user. 20. How do you handle null or missing resources in REST APIs? Throw a resource not found exception and catch it globally using at controller advice, returning a 404 response. 21. How do you implement pagination in a REST API with Spring Boot? Use Spring Data's pageable interface. Java. Copy edit. At getMapping/users. Public page user get users, pageable. The client can pass, page equals 0 and size equals 10 and sort equals name ASC. 22. How do you return partial fields or projections in a REST API? You can use DTOs or interface-based projections to return only the fields you need, avoiding overfetching. 23. What's the best practice for designing REST URIs? Use nouns and hierarchical paths. Example. /users. /users/id/orders. Avoid verbs like /getuser, and keep URIs consistent and meaningful. 24. How do you implement API versioning in Spring Boot? There are several strategies. URI versioning /v1/users. Header versioning, XAPI version, 1. Query param/users, version equals 1. Use custom annotations or conditional controllers to separate versions. 25. What is OpenAPI/Swagger, and why is it useful? OpenAPI, formerly Swagger, is a spec for describing REST APIs. It helps generate interactive API docs and client SDKs. Spring Boot integrates it via Spring.OpenAPI or Swagger 3. 26. How do you generate Swagger documentation in Spring Boot? Add Spring.OpenAPI UI dependency and access your docs at /swaggerui.html. It auto-generates API docs from your controller annotations. 27. How do you handle file uploads in REST APIs? Use at request/per multipart file and map it in a post method. Spring Boot will handle the file upload and temporary storage automatically. 28. How do you return downloadable files in Spring Boot? Return a response entity resource with appropriate headers like content disposition. Java. Copy edit. Return response entity.ok. .header, http headers.content_disposition, attachment, file name equals file.pdf. .body, file resource. 29. How do you return different content types from a single endpoint? Use produces in at getMapping and content negotiation via accept header. Java. Copy edit. At getMapping, value equals /report, produces equals application/JSON, application/PDF. 30. How do you secure REST APIs in Spring Boot? Use Spring Security to add authentication, e.g., basic auth, JWT, OAuth2, and configure filters, roles, and method-level security with at preauthorize. 31. What's the difference between authentication and authorization? Authentication is verifying who the user is, e.g., logging in. Authorization checks if the authenticated user has permission to perform an action, e.g., access a protected resource. 32. What is JWT and how is it used in REST APIs? JWT, JSON Web Token, is a compact, URL-safe token used to represent claims between two parties. In REST APIs, it's typically used for stateless authentication. The server issues a token after login, and the client sends it in the authorization header with each request. 33. What are the components of a JWT token? JWT has three parts: header, algorithm and token type. Payload, claims like user ID, roles. Signature, verifies the token's integrity. Example, xxxxx.yyyyy.zzzzz. 34. How do you validate a JWT in Spring Boot? You parse and verify the token's signature using a secret key or public key, if asymmetric. Then extract user details and load them into the security context. 35. How do you implement JWT authentication in Spring Security? User logs in via /login. Server authenticates and returns a JWT. Each request includes authorization, bearer, token. A JWT filter extracts and validates the token. If valid, Spring Security sets authentication context. 36. What are the pros and cons of JWT? Pros. Stateless, no server session storage needed. Portable and compact. Cons. Cannot revoke a token easily. Risky if tokens are leaked or misused. 37. How do you secure sensitive endpoints in Spring Boot? You can use @preauthorize, @secured, or HTTP security configuration. Java. Copy edit. http.authorize requests. .entmatchers, /admin/**, .hasrole, admin. .anyrequest, .authenticated. 38. What's the purpose of the authorization header in REST APIs? It carries credentials like tokens or basic auth information. For JWT, it looks like makefile, copy edit, authorization, bearer EYJHBJOI. 39. What is role-based access control, RBAC, in Spring Security? RBAC restricts access based on user roles. You can annotate controller methods. Java. Copy edit. @preauthorize, has role, admin. Or configure it in Web Security Configurer. 40. How do you handle token expiration in JWT? JWTs include an EXP claim, expiration. When the token is expired, the server responds with 401 unauthorized, and the client must re-authenticate or refresh the token. 41. What is CRS and how do you configure it in Spring Boot? CRS, Cross-Origin Resource Sharing, allows browsers to make cross-origin requests. You can enable it globally. Java. Copy edit. @bean. Public Web MVC Configurer CORS Configurer. Return registry-registry.addMapping, /**, .allowed origins, *. 42. What is CSRF and do you need it in REST APIs? CSRF, cross-site request forgery, is an attack where unauthorized commands are sent from a user's browser. For stateless REST APIs, CSRF protection is usually disabled, because they don't rely on cookies. 43. How do you disable CSRF in Spring Security? Java. Copy edit. http.csrf.disable. It's safe to disable for REST APIs using tokens. 44. What's the difference between basic auth and JWT? Basic auth sends credentials, username, password, in every request. JWT uses a token, more secure, stateless, and scalable. 45. How do you implement OAuth 2 in Spring Boot? Spring Security provides support for OAuth 2. You can use authorization code flow for web apps. Client credentials flow for machine-to-machine. Integrate with identity providers like Google, Okta, or Keycloak. 46. What is the refresh token flow in OAuth 2? Access tokens expire quickly, but refresh tokens allow the client to request a new access token without re-authenticating the user. 47. What is the purpose of an API gateway in a microservices architecture? An API gateway sits in front of your microservices and handles routing, rate limiting, logging, security, and even token validation. AWS API Gateway and Spring Cloud Gateway are common tools. 48. How do you enforce HTTPS in REST APIs? You configure your load balancer or web server, like Nginx or Tomcat, to redirect HTTP to HTTPS, and in Spring Boot. Properties. Copy edit. Server.ssl.enabled equals true. 49. How do you rate limit API calls? You can use tools like API Gateway, AWS, Kong, Spring Cloud Gateway, Bucket4j or Resilience4j for in-app rate limiting. Use it to prevent abuse and improve reliability. 50. How do you test secured APIs? Use tools like Postman or curl to include headers. Makefile. Copy edit. Authorization, bearer, token. 1. What is a microservices architecture? Microservices architecture is an approach to software design where an application is built as a collection of small, loosely coupled, independently deployable services. Each service handles a specific business function and communicates with others using lightweight protocols like HTTP or messaging queues. 2. How is microservices different from monolithic architecture? In a monolith, everything runs in one process. It's easier to start but harder to scale and maintain. In microservices, components are split into smaller services, which improves scalability, development speed, and fault isolation, but adds complexity like network calls and distributed transactions. 3. What are the advantages of microservices? Independent development and deployment. Better fault isolation. Scalability of individual components. Technology flexibility. Easier CI/CD and team autonomy. 4. What are the challenges in microservices? Service coordination. Distributed data management. Network latency. Versioning and backward compatibility. Monitoring and logging complexity. Security across services. 5. How do microservices communicate with each other? Typically through synchronous, REST APIs, gRPC. Asynchronous, message brokers like RabbitMQ, Kafka. 6. What is service discovery in microservices? Service discovery allows services to find and communicate with each other without hard-coding URLs. Tools like Eureka, Consul, or Kubernetes DNS register services dynamically. 7. How do you handle configuration management in microservices? Use a centralized configuration server, like Spring Cloud Config, where services can pull configurations on startup or even refresh them at runtime. 8. What is an API gateway? An API gateway sits between the client and backend services. It handles routing, rate limiting, authentication, aggregation, and more. Examples: Spring Cloud Gateway, Kong, AWS API Gateway. 9. What is circuit breaker pattern? It prevents repeated failures from crashing the system. If a service call fails repeatedly, the circuit breaker opens and blocks further calls temporarily. Tools like Resilience4j or Hystrix are used to implement it. 10. What is service orchestration versus choreography? Orchestration: a central controller manages service interactions. Choreography: each service reacts to events, no central brain, more decoupled. 11. How do you handle data consistency in microservices? Use the eventual consistency model with messaging systems and patterns like Saga Pattern to maintain consistency across services. You avoid distributed transactions whenever possible. 12. What is the Saga Pattern? It's a way to manage distributed transactions by breaking them into local transactions, coordinated via events or commands. If one fails, compensating actions are triggered to roll back. 13. How do you ensure security in microservices? Use centralized authentication, like OAuth 2 with Keycloak, and propagate JWT tokens between services. API gateways can enforce authentication and authorization. 14. How do you deploy microservices? Each microservice is packaged as a Docker container and deployed independently using Kubernetes, AWS ECS, or another orchestration platform. 15. How do you monitor microservices? Use tools like Prometheus plus Grafana for metrics, ELK Stack, Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana, for logs, Zipkin or Jaeger for distributed tracing, Spring Boot Actuator for health and metrics. 16. What's the role of containerization in microservices? Containers, e.g., Docker, allows services to run consistently across environments and simplify deployment, isolation, and scaling. Each microservice runs in its own container. 17. How do you handle versioning in microservices APIs? You can version using URI path, e.g., /API/v1/users. Request headers, accept, application/vnd.myapp.v2 plus JSON. Keep old versions stable while gradually migrating clients. 18. What is sidecar pattern in microservices? A sidecar runs alongside a service, providing infrastructure features like logging, service discovery, or security without modifying the main application. Example, Istio Sidecar Proxy. 19. How do you test microservices? Unit tests for individual components. Contract tests to validate service contracts. Integration tests between services. End-to-end tests for the full flow. 20. How do you implement logging and tracing across services? Use correlation IDs passed across services, centralized logging with ELK or Loki, and tracing tools like Zipkin, Jaeger, or OpenTelemetry to visualize request flows. 21. What is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous communication in microservices? Synchronous means services call each other directly, waiting for a response, like REST. Asynchronous uses message brokers like Kafka or RabbitMQ, where services communicate via events without waiting. Asynchronous systems are more decoupled and resilient to failure. 22. What is the anti-corruption layer pattern in microservices? It's a layer between two systems that prevents one system's design or data model from corrupting another. It helps when integrating with legacy systems by transforming data before it enters your service. 23. What is bulkhead pattern in microservices? Like compartments on a ship, bulkheads isolate failures. In microservices, you separate service calls into isolated pools so that failure in one doesn't crash the whole system. 24. What is rate limiting and how do you implement it? Rate limiting restricts the number of requests a client can make in a time window. It prevents abuse and overload. You can implement it with API gateways, like Kong, AWS API Gateway, or libraries like Bucket4j in Spring Boot. 25. What is backpressure? Backpressure is a mechanism to slow down the rate of requests when a system is overloaded. It signals upstream services to reduce load or delay processing. 26. What is eventual consistency and how do you implement it? Eventual consistency means all services will be consistent over time, even if not immediately. You implement it using messaging, Kafka, RabbitMQ, and event-driven patterns like the Saga pattern. 27. What's the difference between orchestration and choreography in Saga pattern? Orchestration, a central orchestrator coordinates all steps. Choreography, services listen and react to events independently. Choreography is more decoupled, but orchestration gives more control. 28. What is service mesh and how does it relate to microservices? A service mesh, like Istio or Linkerd, handles service-to-service communication, security, and observability without changing code. It works via sidecar proxies. 29. What is the role of a message broker in microservices? Message brokers like Kafka, RabbitMQ, or ActiveMQ enable asynchronous communication. They decouple services, buffer load, and enable event-driven architecture. 30. What's the difference between Kafka and RabbitMQ? Kafka is high throughput, distributed, great for streaming and event logs. RabbitMQ is easier for request response and task queues. Kafka is more scalable, RabbitMQ is more lightweight and flexible. 31. How do you deploy microservices at scale? Use container orchestration platforms like Kubernetes to manage deployment, scaling, rolling updates, and service discovery across multiple services. 32. What are Kubernetes pods and services? A pod is the smallest unit in Kubernetes, running one or more containers. A service exposes your pods and ensures stable networking, even as pods change. 33. What is a Helm chart? Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes. Helm charts define your application's Kubernetes resources in a reusable, version template, simplifying deployment. 34. What's the difference between stateful set and deployment in Kubernetes? Deployment is for stateless applications. Stateful set is for apps that require stable network identities and persistent storage, like databases. 35. What is blue-green deployment? Blue-green deployment runs two versions, blue equals current, green equals new. You switch traffic to green once it's verified, enabling zero downtime deployments. 36. What is canary release? Canary release gradually sends a small percentage of traffic to the new version, increasing confidence before rolling it out to everyone. 37. How do you monitor microservices in production? Use Prometheus plus Grafana for metrics. ELK/OpenSearch for centralized logs. Zipkin/Jaeger for tracing. Spring Boot Actuator for health endpoints. 38. What is observability in microservices? Observability is the ability to understand what's happening inside a system. It includes metrics, logs, and traces. It helps you debug, detect anomalies, and improve performance. 39. How do you implement distributed tracing? Use tools like OpenTelemetry, Zipkin, or Jaeger. Add trace IDs to logs and HTTP headers so you can follow a request through multiple services. 40. What's the role of CI/CD in microservices? CI/CD automates build, test, and deploy. In microservices, each service may have its own pipeline, making testing, integration, and rollback faster and more reliable. 41. How do you handle dependency between microservices? You should minimize tight coupling. Use events instead of direct calls where possible, define clear APIs, and use contracts to ensure stability. 42. What is contract testing and why is it important? Contract testing ensures that the communication between services adheres to agreed formats. Tools like Pact help detect breaking changes early. 43. What is polyglot persistence in microservices? Each microservice can use a database that fits its needs, for example, PostgreSQL for orders, MongoDB for products, Redis for caching. This is called polyglot persistence. 44. How do you migrate a monolith to microservices? You start by identifying modules, then extract them one by one. Use a strangler pattern, gradually replacing monolith features with microservices until the monolith is retired. 45. How do you avoid duplication of common logic? Extract shared logic into libraries or platform services, e.g., auth service. Avoid copy-pasting logic across services to reduce maintenance overhead. 46. How do you ensure high availability in microservices? Deploy multiple instances across zones. Use health checks and load balancers. Implement retry, timeout, and fallback mechanisms. Use circuit breakers and failover strategies. 47. How do you scale microservices independently? Each microservice can be scaled horizontally based on demand. Kubernetes or ECS can auto-scale services based on CPU, memory, or custom metrics. 48. How do you ensure backward compatibility between services? Use versioned APIs, avoid breaking changes, and test with consumer-driven contracts to ensure clients still work with updated services. 49. What are the risks of too many microservices? Operational overhead. Complexity in debugging. Increased latency. Difficult testing. Balance is key, don't oversplit your architecture. 50. When should you not use microservices? If your team is small, or the system is simple and fast-changing, microservices might add unnecessary complexity. Start with a modular monolith and evolve when needed. 1. What are design patterns and why are they important? Design patterns are proven solutions to common software design problems. They help developers write code that's reusable, maintainable, and easier to understand. Patterns also improve team communication by providing a common vocabulary for solving architectural challenges. 2. What is the singleton pattern? When would you use it? The singleton pattern ensures that only one instance of a class exists in the application. It's useful for things like configuration managers, logging, or thread pools where a global shared instance is required. In Java, this can be implemented with a private constructor and a static instance method. 3. How do you implement a thread-safe singleton in Java? The safest way is to use the enum approach. Java. Copy edit. Public enum logger. Instance. Public void log, string message. This is lazy, thread-safe, and protects against serialization issues. 4. What is the factory method pattern? The factory method lets you define an interface for creating objects, but lets subclasses decide which class to instantiate. It's useful when the creation logic is complex or dependent on conditions. 5. How is factory different from abstract factory? Factory method creates objects of one family. Abstract factory creates related objects across multiple families, e.g., different GUI components for Windows versus Mac. 6. What is the builder pattern? When is it useful? The builder pattern helps you construct complex objects step by step, especially when they have many optional fields. It's often used in immutable object creation, like in Java's string builder or Lombok builder. 7. What is the prototype pattern? Prototype creates new objects by cloning an existing one. It's useful when creating a new object is expensive or when object configurations are complex. 8. What is the adapter pattern? Adapter allows incompatible interfaces to work together. It's like a wrapper that translates one interface into another. For example, adapting a legacy API to fit a new interface. 9. What is the decorator pattern? Decorator adds new behavior to an object dynamically without changing its original structure. It's often used in UI components or Java I/O streams, buffered reader, input stream reader, etc. 10. What is the facade pattern? The facade pattern provides a simplified interface to a complex system. It hides the complexities of subsystems and exposes only what the client needs. A good example is Spring's JDBC template, which wraps lower-level JDBC logic. 11. What is the strategy pattern? Strategy allows you to define a family of algorithms and make them interchangeable at runtime. It promotes open/closed principle. You can add new strategies without modifying existing code. 12. Give a real-world example of strategy pattern in Java. A good example is Java's comparator interface. You can define different sorting strategies by passing different comparators. 13. What is the observer pattern? Observer defines a one-to-many dependency between objects. When the subject changes, all observers are notified. It's widely used in event-driven systems, like UI listeners or message brokers. 14. What's the difference between observer and publisher-subscriber? Observer is tightly coupled. The subject knows its observers. In contrast, PubSub is decoupled using a broker or message queue. Publishers don't know who the subscribers are. 15. What is the command pattern? Command encapsulates a request as an object, letting you parameterize clients with operations. It's useful for task queues, undo-redo functionality, and remote execution. 16. What is the template method pattern? This pattern defines the skeleton of an algorithm in a method, deferring some steps to subclasses. It helps enforce consistency while allowing flexibility in implementation. 17. What is the chain of responsibility pattern? In this pattern, a request is passed along a chain of handlers. Each handler decides whether to process the request or pass it to the next. It's used in logging, security, and filter chains, like Spring filters. 18. What is the state pattern? State allows an object to change its behavior when its internal state changes. It's useful for modeling workflows, like order status transitions or traffic lights. 19. What is the mediator pattern? Mediator reduces the complexity between classes by centralizing communication. Instead of objects referring to each other directly, they communicate through a mediator, improving maintainability. 20. What is the memento pattern? Memento captures and restores an object's state without exposing its internal details. It's often used for implementing undo features. 21. How is the singleton pattern used in Spring Framework? By default, all Spring beans are singletons. When you declare A at component or A at service, Spring creates a single instance and manages its lifecycle. It uses singleton internally to reduce object creation overhead and promote consistency. 22. How does Spring use the factory pattern? Spring uses the factory pattern in its bean factory and application context. These are factory interfaces responsible for creating and managing bean instances. Also, factory bean T is a special interface you can implement to create objects with custom instantiation logic. 23. Where is the proxy pattern used in Spring? Spring AOP, aspect-oriented programming, uses the proxy pattern to apply cross-cutting concerns like logging, transactions, and security without changing the core logic. It creates dynamic proxies using JDK or CGLIB under the hood. 24. How does Spring Security use the chain of responsibility pattern? Spring Security applies filters in a chain. Each filter handles a specific concern like authentication, authorization, CSRF, etc. These filters pass the request along the chain unless a rule blocks it. 25. How is the template method pattern applied in Spring? Spring provides many templates like JDBC template, REST template, and JPA template, which define the skeleton of an operation and let developers plug in the details like query or request parameters. 26. What is a real example of the strategy pattern in Spring? Spring Security lets you plug in different authentication mechanisms like form login, JWT, OAuth2, all implementing the same interface. You can swap strategies without changing the main workflow. 27. Can you name where builder pattern is used in modern Java or Spring? Yes, String Builder, Lombok at Builder, HTTP headers, and modern Fluent APIs like Spring's Web Client or Mock MVC use builder pattern to create complex objects in a readable way. 28. Where is the observer pattern used in Spring applications? Spring's application event publisher allows you to publish events that listeners can subscribe to. This is an implementation of the observer pattern, enabling decoupled communication between components. 29. What design pattern does Java's optional represent? Optional is inspired by the null object pattern, providing a safe way to represent the absence of a value without using null. 30. How is the decorator pattern seen in Java I/O? Java I/O uses decorators to add behavior to streams. Java. Copy edit. Buffered reader equals new buffered reader, new input stream reader, input stream. Each wrapper enhances the functionality of the stream. 31. What is an anti-pattern in design? An anti-pattern is a common solution to a problem that seems correct but is usually ineffective or counterproductive. Examples include God object, spaghetti code, and overuse of singleton. 32. Can using too many design patterns be harmful? Yes. Over-engineering with patterns makes the code complex and hard to maintain. Patterns should solve real problems, not just be added for academic reasons. 33. What's the difference between composition and inheritance in design? Inheritance uses is-a relationship and often leads to tight coupling. Composition uses has-a relationship and promotes flexibility and loose coupling. Prefer composition over inheritance where possible. 34. What are solid principles and how do they relate to design patterns? Solid is a set of 5 principles that guide object-oriented design. S. Single responsibility. O. Open/closed. L. Liskov substitution. I. Interface segregation. D. Dependency inversion. Design patterns like strategy, decorator, and factory support these principles. 35. What is the difference between template method and strategy? Template method defines the algorithm in a superclass and lets subclasses override specific steps. Strategy allows completely changing the algorithm at runtime by injecting different strategies. Strategy is more flexible and promotes composition over inheritance. 36. What's the key difference between proxy and decorator? Proxy controls access to an object, security, caching, etc. Decorator adds new behavior or responsibilities. Both wrap another object, but for different purposes. 37. What's the difference between factory and builder? Factory decides which class to instantiate. Builder helps construct complex objects step by step. Use factory for simple decisions, builder for detailed object construction. 38. Can you mix multiple design patterns in one solution? Absolutely. Real-world applications often combine patterns. For example, a factory might return a proxy-wrapped object that uses a strategy internally. 39. When should you use the mediator pattern? Use mediator when many components interact in a complex way. It centralizes logic and avoids tightly coupled components, common in UI systems or microservices orchestration. 40. Why is understanding design patterns important for senior developers? Patterns help you write scalable, maintainable, and testable code. They also improve team communication. When you say, "Let's use strategy here," everyone knows the intent. 41. What is the thread pool pattern? The thread pool pattern maintains a pool of threads to execute tasks instead of creating a new thread for each one. It improves performance by reducing overhead and controlling concurrency. In Java, it's implemented via executor service. 42. What is the producer-consumer pattern? This pattern decouples producers of data from consumers. It uses a shared queue where producers insert data, and consumers take it for processing. It's widely used in messaging systems and multi-threaded applications. 43. How does Java support the producer-consumer pattern? Java provides blocking queues like linked blocking queue in the java.util.concurrent package to implement this pattern safely without needing manual synchronization. 44. What is the read-write lock pattern? This pattern allows multiple readers or one writer at a time. It's ideal for resources that are read frequently but written rarely. In Java, it's implemented with reentrant read-write lock. 45. What is the future pattern in Java? The future pattern represents the result of an asynchronous computation. Java's future and completable future let you run tasks in the background and get results later without blocking the main thread unnecessarily. 46. How is the circuit breaker pattern used in microservices? The circuit breaker prevents repeated failures from crashing the system. If a service call fails repeatedly, the circuit opens and future calls are blocked temporarily. Libraries like Resilience4j or Hystrix implement this pattern in Java. 47. What is the retry pattern and when should you use it? The retry pattern automatically retries failed operations with a configurable delay. It's useful in distributed systems where transient failures are common. Combine it with exponential backoff to avoid flooding services. 48. What is the rate limiter pattern? This pattern controls the number of requests processed per unit time. It's essential for protecting services from abuse or overload. Libraries like Bucket4j or Spring Cloud Gateway support rate limiting. 49. What is the bulkhead pattern and how do you use it? Bulkhead pattern isolates components so that failure in one doesn't affect others. You can use different thread pools for critical services, ensuring that a failure in one doesn't exhaust all resources. 50. How do these concurrency patterns help in microservices architecture? They improve system resilience, fault tolerance, and scalability. By controlling access, managing failures, and handling load efficiently, they make microservices more robust in production. 51. What is the observer pattern in a reactive context? In reactive programming, the observer pattern is core. A publisher emits data, and subscribers react to it asynchronously. Libraries like Project Reactor or RxJava are built around this concept. 52. What is the reactor pattern? The reactor pattern handles concurrent I/O using a single-threaded event loop. It waits for events and dispatches them to appropriate handlers. It underpins frameworks like Netty, Spring Webflux, and Node.js. 53. What is the functional command pattern? In functional programming, commands can be represented as first-class functions or lambdas. Instead of object-oriented command objects, you pass around functions that encapsulate behavior. 54. How is the pipeline pattern applied in Java streams? Java streams allow chaining multiple operations, map, filter, reduce. This represents the pipeline pattern, which processes data through a series of stages, efficiently and declaratively. 55. What is the event sourcing pattern? In event sourcing, instead of storing the current state, you store all state-changing events. The current state is reconstructed by replaying those events. It provides audit trails and is commonly used in CQRS. 56. What is CQRS and how does it relate to event sourcing? CQRS stands for Command Query Responsibility Segregation. It separates read and write models, improving performance and scalability. It's often used together with event sourcing in microservices. 57. What's the difference between reactive streams and Java streams? Java streams are pull-based and synchronous. Reactive streams are push-based and asynchronous. Reactive streams are suitable for handling large or infinite data streams with backpressure. 58. What is backpressure in reactive systems? Backpressure is a mechanism to signal that a subscriber is overwhelmed and can't process incoming data fast enough. This helps avoid memory overflows and improves system stability. 59. What is the role of the publisher-subscriber pattern in Kafka? Kafka is built on the pub/sub model. Producers publish messages to topics, and consumers subscribe to them. This decouples communication between services and allows scalability. 60. When should you choose reactive programming over traditional models? Reactive programming shines when you're dealing with high concurrency with non-blocking I/O, streaming data, event-driven architecture. It improves resource efficiency but adds complexity. Use it when the benefits outweigh the learning curve. 1. What is a B-tree index and why is it commonly used? A B-tree index is a balanced tree structure that keeps data sorted and allows for fast lookup, insertion, and deletion. It's the default indexing method in most relational databases like PostgreSQL and MySQL because it works well with range queries, equality checks, and sorting. 2. When should you use a hash index instead of a B-tree? Hash indexes are optimized for exact match queries. For example, if you're always querying where email equals, a hash index can be faster than a B-tree. However, they don't support range queries or ordering, which limits their use. PostgreSQL supports them but with some limitations. 3. What are GIST and GN indexes in PostgreSQL? GIST, Generalized Search Tree, and GN, Generalized Inverted Index, are advanced indexing structures in PostgreSQL. GIST is used for complex data types like geometric shapes or full-text search. Gin is optimized for indexing arrays or documents with multiple values. It's commonly used for joined fields or full-text search. Both provide powerful indexing for use cases that go beyond standard numbers and strings. 4. How does an index improve query performance? An index works like a shortcut. Instead of scanning the entire table, the database can jump directly to the rows it needs. It reduces disk I/O and speeds up query execution. However, it comes at a cost. Indexes consume extra space and can slow down writes because they must be updated. 5. What is a covering index? A covering index contains all the columns needed to satisfy a query. This means the database can use only the index to return results, without reading from the table. It dramatically boosts performance for certain queries, especially read-heavy workloads. 6. What is a query execution plan and how do you analyze it? A query execution plan shows how the database processes a query, which indexes it uses, how it joins tables, how many rows it scans, etc. In PostgreSQL, you can use Explain Analyze to view the plan and see where bottlenecks occur. It's an essential tool for performance tuning. 7. What is the difference between nested loop join, hash join, and merge join? These are strategies the database uses to join tables. Nested loop join is good for small data sets. It checks each row in one table against the other. Hash join builds a hash table of one input and probes it, efficient for large, unsorted data. Merge join is fast for pre-sorted data. It merges rows like in a merge sort. The optimizer chooses the best one based on table size and indexes. 8. What are some common causes of slow queries? Some typical reasons are missing or unused indexes, poorly written joins or subqueries, inefficient functions in where clauses, fetching too many rows, bad query plans due to outdated statistics. Regularly analyzing and indexing the right columns can fix many of these issues. 9. What is an index-only scan? An index-only scan is when the database can answer a query using just the index. It doesn't need to touch the table at all. This is possible when the index includes all the required columns. The visibility map in PostgreSQL confirms that the rows are visible. It's one of the most efficient ways to read data. 10. How do database statistics affect query performance? The query planner relies on statistics to estimate row counts and costs. If these stats are outdated, it might choose a bad plan, like using a nested loop on large tables. You can update statistics using Analyze or Vacuum Analyze in PostgreSQL. 11. What is a database transaction? A transaction is a sequence of operations executed as a single logical unit of work. It must follow the ACID principles, atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability, to ensure data integrity, even in case of failures. 12. What does ACID stand for? Atomicity. All operations in a transaction succeed or none do. Consistency. The database moves from one valid state to another. Isolation. Concurrent transactions don't interfere with each other. Durability. Once a transaction commits, the changes are permanent, even after a crash. These principles help keep the database reliable and predictable. 13. What are the standard isolation levels in SQL? There are 4 main isolation levels. Read uncommitted, dirty reads are allowed. Read committed, only committed data can be read, PostgreSQL default. Repeatable read, prevents non-repeatable reads. Serializable, fully isolates transactions, but with performance trade-offs. Each level balances data accuracy and concurrency performance. 14. What is the default isolation level in PostgreSQL? In PostgreSQL, the default is read committed. It ensures that a transaction only sees data that's already committed by others. It prevents dirty reads, but not non-repeatable reads or phantom reads. 15. What is a phantom read? A phantom read occurs when a transaction reads a set of rows that match a condition, but a concurrent transaction inserts new rows that match that same condition. If the first transaction repeats the query, the new rows appear, hence the name phantom. 16. What is a deadlock in a database? A deadlock happens when two or more transactions hold locks that the other needs, and none can proceed. It's a circular dependency that causes all transactions to wait indefinitely, unless one is forcibly rolled back. 17. How does PostgreSQL handle deadlocks? PostgreSQL automatically detects deadlocks using a wait-for graph. When a cycle is found, it aborts one of the transactions to break the loop and lets the others continue. The rollback transaction must be retried by the application. 18. How can you avoid deadlocks in practice? Some strategies include: always acquire locks in a consistent order. Keep transactions short and fast. Avoid user interaction inside transactions. Use optimistic locking for high concurrency cases. 19. What is optimistic locking versus pessimistic locking? Pessimistic locking locks the row right away to prevent conflicts. Optimistic locking assumes no conflict and checks for it only before committing, often using a version field. Optimistic locking is better for high concurrency applications, as it avoids unnecessary blocking. 20. What are MVCC and how does it work in PostgreSQL? MVCC stands for Multi-Version Concurrency Control. It allows multiple transactions to access data at the same time by maintaining multiple versions of each row. PostgreSQL uses MVCC to provide consistent reads without locking. Each transaction sees a snapshot of the data as it existed at the beginning of that transaction. 21. What is table partitioning in SQL databases? Partitioning means splitting a large table into smaller, more manageable pieces, called partitions. It improves query performance, manageability, and maintenance. The partitions are still treated as one logical table in queries. 22. What are the types of partitioning in PostgreSQL? PostgreSQL supports range partitioning, based on value ranges, e.g., by date. List partitioning, based on predefined lists, e.g., region equals US. Hash partitioning, based on hashing a key, e.g., customer_ID. You can also use composite partitioning, combining two or more types. 23. What is the benefit of partition pruning? Partition pruning means the database only scans the relevant partitions during a query. For example, if you query where year equals 2023, only the partition for 2023 is scanned. This dramatically reduces query time. 24. What is sharding and how is it different from partitioning? Sharding splits data across multiple physical databases, or servers, not just within one. Partitioning happens inside a single database instance. Sharding is necessary when data size or traffic exceeds the capacity of a single database. 25. When should you consider sharding a database? Sharding becomes necessary when a single database can't handle the read/write volume. You need to distribute data across regions. You want to reduce the size of indexes or backups. However, it adds complexity in terms of transactions and joins. 26. What are the challenges of sharding? Cross-shard joins become difficult or slow. Global consistency is harder to enforce. Shard rebalancing and resharding can be operationally complex. It's a powerful but advanced technique that requires careful design. 27. What is database replication? Replication is the process of copying data from one database, primary, to another, replica. It's used for high availability, load balancing, and backups. Changes on the primary are propagated to replicas, either synchronously or asynchronously. 28. What's the difference between synchronous and asynchronous replication? Synchronous, the primary waits for the replica to confirm the write before committing, safer, but slower. Asynchronous. The primary commits immediately and sends changes to the replica later, faster, but at risk. 29. How does PostgreSQL support replication? PostgreSQL supports streaming replication, binary level, asynchronous or synchronous. Logical replication, row-level changes, allows partial replication. It also supports read replicas for load balancing and hot standby nodes for failover. 30. What is high availability, HA, in databases and how do you achieve it? High availability ensures the database is always accessible, even if a server fails. You can achieve HA using replication with automatic failover, load balancers to reroute traffic, monitoring tools like Patroni, PG_auto_failover, or AWS RDS Multi-AZ. The goal is to minimize downtime and data loss. 31. What is the difference between ACID and base in databases? ACID is designed for reliable, transactional systems, like traditional SQL databases. Base is more relaxed, used in distributed or NoSQL systems for better scalability. ACID ensures strong consistency and reliability. Base embraces eventual consistency to achieve better availability and performance. Base stands for basically available, soft state, eventually consistent. 32. When would you prefer base over ACID? Base is better when you need high scalability and low latency. The system is distributed across multiple regions. It's okay to tolerate temporary inconsistency, like in social networks or analytics systems. ACID is better for financial or critical systems where accuracy and consistency are mandatory. 33. What are the main types of NoSQL databases? There are 4 major types. Key-value stores, e.g., Redis, simple, ultra-fast, good for caching. Document stores, e.g., MongoDB, flexible schemas, store JSON-like documents. Column family stores, e.g., Cassandra, great for time series and big data. Graph databases, e.g., Neo4j, optimized for relationships and network traversal. Each is optimized for specific use cases. 34. What is eventual consistency? Eventual consistency means all nodes in a distributed system will eventually have the same data, but not necessarily at the same time. It's a trade-off, you get better performance and fault tolerance, but at the cost of strong consistency. 35. What is CAP theorem and how does it apply to distributed systems? CAP stands for consistency, availability, partition tolerance. The theorem says you can only guarantee 2 out of 3 in a distributed system. For example, CP, consistency plus partition tolerance Zookeeper. AP, availability plus partition tolerance DynamoDB. CA is theoretically impossible in a distributed setting with network failures. 36. What is a quorum in distributed databases? A quorum is the minimum number of nodes that must agree on a read or write operation. It ensures consistency. For example, if you have 5 replicas, you might require 3 nodes to acknowledge a write before it's considered successful. 37. What are the trade-offs of using NoSQL databases? Pros: scalability, flexible schemas, better performance under large loads. Cons: weaker consistency guarantees, fewer mature tools and query languages, harder to enforce complex constraints. You should choose NoSQL when your schema is flexible or your system is write-heavy. 38. What is a graph database and when would you use it? A graph database stores data as nodes and edges. It's ideal for highly connected data, like social networks, recommendation systems, or fraud detection. With graph queries, you can traverse relationships in milliseconds, which would be very slow in relational databases. 39. What are some real-world examples of distributed databases? Cassandra, decentralized, wide column store for time series or logs. CockroachDB, PostgreSQL compatible, highly consistent distributed SQL. DynamoDB, AWS managed key-value store with global replication. MongoDB, sharded document store, popular for flexible data models. 40. How do distributed databases handle failure and recovery? They use replication, copies data across nodes for fault tolerance. Consensus algorithms, like Raft or Paxos to agree on writes. Leader election, one node acts as coordinator, and others follow. Write-ahead logs, to recover data after crashes. They're designed to keep working even if parts of the system fail. 41. What is a common table expression, CTE? A CTE is a temporary result set that you define at the start of a query using the with clause. It helps make complex queries easier to read and organize, like breaking down subqueries into named blocks. CTEs can also be recursive, which is useful for hierarchical data. 42. What is a recursive CTE and when is it useful? A recursive CTE refers to itself to perform iteration. It's commonly used for hierarchical data structures like organization charts, folder trees, or bill of materials. For example, in PostgreSQL, you can use a recursive CTE to walk through parent-child relationships until all levels are covered. 43. What are window functions in SQL? Window functions perform calculations across a set of rows related to the current row, without collapsing them into a single result. Examples include row_number, rank, sum, over, and avg, over. They're great for analytics, such as calculating running totals, ranking, or comparing current values to prior rows. 44. What is the difference between group by and window functions? Group by aggregates rows and reduces the result set. Window functions keep all rows but add extra computed columns. So, window functions are more flexible when you need detailed row-level data along with aggregate insights. 45. What is the use of the partition by clause in a window function? Partition by breaks the dataset into groups, like group by, but still returns every row. For example, rank. Over, partition by department order by salary desk, ranks employees within each department. 46. How does lag and lead work in SQL? Lag lets you access data from the previous row. Lead accesses the next row. These functions are useful when you need to compare values across rows, like checking trends, gaps, or changes over time. 47. What is a pivot query in SQL? A pivot transforms rows into columns. It's helpful when you want to summarize data in a matrix format. For example, showing monthly sales for each region where months become columns. In PostgreSQL, you can use filter, case when, or crosstab, from the TableFunc extension to do this. 48. How can you unpivot data in SQL? Unpivoting means transforming columns into rows. You can achieve this using union all or in PostgreSQL with John_each, or honest, when working with arrays or JSON fields. 49. What are rollup and cube in SQL aggregation? Rollup creates subtotals by grouping hierarchically, e.g., department team employee. Cube creates all combinations of groupings. Both are useful in reporting or analytics to provide aggregated data across multiple dimensions. 50. What is the purpose of analytic functions in SQL? Analytic functions help you analyze trends, patterns, and performance over time, without writing complex self-joins. They're used in real-world scenarios like ranking top products per category, calculating moving averages, detecting growth or decline over time. These tools make SQL a powerful language for data analysis. 51. How does PostgreSQL implement MVCC, multi-version concurrency control? PostgreSQL uses MVCC to allow multiple transactions to work simultaneously without locking each other. Instead of overwriting rows, it creates new row versions for every update, and uses a visibility map to show which version each transaction can see. This enables consistent reads and avoids most locks during reads. 52. What is the purpose of the vacuum operation in PostgreSQL? When rows are updated or deleted, old versions remain in the database. Vacuum removes these dead rows to reclaim space and prevent table bloat. PostgreSQL also has AutoVacuum, which runs in the background to maintain healthy performance. 53. What is Analyze in PostgreSQL and why is it important? Analyze collects statistics about the distribution of data in tables and indexes. These statistics help the query planner make smart decisions about join methods, scan types, and index usage. Outdated statistics can lead to poor query plans and slow performance. 54. What are the different types of indexes in PostgreSQL? PostgreSQL supports several index types. B-tree, default, for equality and range queries. Hash, equality only, limited use. Gist, for complex data like geometry. GN, for full-text search and JSON. Brin, for large, sequential data like time series. Each type has strengths depending on your use case. 55. What is the GN index used for in PostgreSQL? GN, generalized inverted index, is ideal for indexing fields with multiple values, like arrays, JSON documents, or full-text search. It's optimized for situations where each row has many terms, and you want to search by term quickly. 56. What is the difference between GIST and GN indexes? GIST is flexible and can index complex data types like geometric shapes or ranges. GN is faster for querying many elements, like searching for tags or words, but slower to update. Use GN for read-heavy, searchable documents. Use GIST for flexible indexing with custom operators. 57. What is the role of the PostgreSQL Query Planner? The Query Planner analyzes a query and decides the most efficient way to execute it. It considers things like table size, available indexes, join types, and cost estimates. You can view this using Explain or Explain Analyze to tune performance. 58. What is a sequential scan and when does PostgreSQL use it? A sequential scan means reading the entire table row by row. PostgreSQL uses it when no suitable index exists. The query needs most of the table's rows. Statistics suggest it's faster than using an index. While slow on large tables, it can be optimal in certain queries. 59. What is Brin indexing in PostgreSQL and when is it useful? Brin, block range index, stores summary data about blocks of rows, rather than individual row values. It's useful for very large, append-only tables like logs or time series data. It's space-efficient and fast for range queries on naturally ordered data. 60. How can you identify slow queries in PostgreSQL? You can enable and review slow_query_log. Use pg_stat_ statements to track execution times and frequencies. Run Explain Analyze to see execution plans. Use monitoring tools like pgbadger, pghero, or cloud-native tools, like AWS RDS Performance Insights. Consistent analysis of these logs is key to performance tuning. 61. What are common caching strategies in a database-driven system? There are three common caching levels. Application-level cache, e.g., Redis, Memcached stores frequently accessed data to reduce DB hits. Query result cache, caches entire query results. Object or row-level cache, stores specific entities, like in Hibernate second-level cache. Caching reduces database load and improves response time, but you need cache invalidation strategies to avoid stale data. 62. What is the difference between write-through and write-behind cache? Write-through, writes to cache and database at the same time. Write-behind, writes only to cache, and updates the DB later asynchronously. Write-through is safer but slower, write-behind is faster but risks data loss if cache fails. 63. What are the best practices to optimize SQL queries? Some key tips include: use proper indexes. Avoid select asterisk. Filter early and limit result sets. Avoid unnecessary joins and subqueries. Use CTEs or window functions for clarity. Analyze with explain, analyze and monitor query co. 64. How do indexes impact query performance? Indexes speed up searches and filtering but add overhead on inserts and updates. The right index can reduce query time from seconds to milliseconds. However, too many indexes or wrong indexes can cause bloat and slow writes. 65. What is the difference between clustered and non-clustered indexes? A clustered index defines the physical order of data in a table, like primary key in SQL Server or MySQL. A non-clustered index is a separate structure that points to the data rows. PostgreSQL doesn't support true clustered indexes but allows one-time clustering. 66. What is query plan caching and does PostgreSQL support it? Query plan caching saves the execution plan for repeated queries. PostgreSQL does not cache plans for dynamic SQL, but it does cache plans for prepared statements and functions. Java applications using JDBC can leverage server-prepared statements to benefit from this. 67. What is database connection pooling and why is it important? Connection pooling reuses active database connections instead of creating new ones for each request. It reduces overhead and improves throughput. Tools like Hikari CP or pgbouncer are common for pooling in PostgreSQL. 68. How do you decide when to denormalize a database schema? Denormalization involves intentionally adding redundancy to improve read performance. It makes sense when reads are much more frequent than writes. Joins are too expensive. You have distributed databases or need pre-aggregated views. But you must manage data consistency manually. 69. What is a materialized view and how is it different from a regular view? A materialized view stores the results of a query physically, unlike a regular view which is just a stored query. Materialized views are great for expensive aggregations or joins but must be refreshed manually or on schedule. 70. What is the role of schema design in query performance? Good schema design matches data access patterns, reduces join complexity, encourages proper indexing, minimizes redundancy while ensuring scalability. Poor schema design can bottleneck performance, make indexing ineffective, and slow down development. 71. What is database migration and why is it important? Database migration refers to applying schema changes, like creating tables, altering columns, or adding indexes, in a controlled and repeatable way. In production systems, you need migrations to manage versions across environments and avoid manual errors. 72. What tools are commonly used for database migrations? Popular tools include Flyway, Liquibase, Hibernate Envers, for auditing plus schema versioning. These tools help you write migration scripts in SQL or Java, apply them in order, and track the current schema version. 73. What is the difference between forward and backward compatible migrations? Forward compatible changes add features without breaking existing functionality, like adding new columns with defaults. Backward compatible changes ensure the old version can still work after the change. In continuous deployment, it's crucial to support both to allow zero downtime deployments. 74. How do you safely apply schema changes in production? Some best practices. Use version migrations via tools like Flyway. Apply non-blocking changes first, e.g., add column, not drop. Monitor slow queries and locks. Use blue/green deployments or feature toggles to phase changes. Always test against staging with production-like data. 75. How do you handle data versioning in your applications? You can use audit tables to store versions of changes. Add version or updated _ at columns for optimistic locking. Use frameworks like Hibernate Envers for automatic tracking. Versioning is especially important when legal or historical traceability is required. 76. What is optimistic locking and when should you use it? Optimistic locking prevents lost updates by checking if the record has changed since it was read. It uses a version number or timestamp column. If two users read and try to update the same record, only the first one to commit succeeds, the other gets a conflict. Use it in high-read, low-conflict systems. 77. How do you ensure database security at the data layer? Some security measures include least privilege access control, limit user permissions. Encrypted connections, SSL/TLS. Encryption at rest and in transit. Database firewall rules and IP whitelisting. Auditing tools like pgaudit in PostgreSQL. Using parameterized queries to prevent SQL injection. 78. What is SQL injection and how can you prevent it? SQL injection is a security vulnerability where untrusted input alters SQL logic. Prevention strategies. Always use prepared statements or parameterized queries. Never build SQL with string concatenation. Sanitize inputs when necessary. Most modern ORMs like Hibernate and frameworks like Spring JDBC handle this safely. 79. How do you implement auditing in PostgreSQL? You can use triggers to log changes into audit tables. Use pgaudit extension for fine-grained auditing of DDL/DML. Enable statement logging for all queries or by user/role. Auditing is critical for compliance, troubleshooting, and fraud detection. 80. What is data retention policy and how is it enforced at the database level? A data retention policy defines how long data is kept before deletion. It's enforced by scheduled deletion scripts. Partitioning plus dropping old partitions. TTL, time to live, in NoSQL or custom cron jobs in SQL. This is often legally required in domains like finance, healthcare, and GDPR. 81. What is observability in the context of databases and backend systems? Observability refers to the ability to understand and troubleshoot your system by collecting and analyzing data from logs, metrics, and traces. In databases, this means tracking slow queries, lock contention, index usage, resource utilization, CPU, memory, I/O. White heavy checkmark 82. What are the three pillars of observability? Logs, structured or unstructured data about events. Metrics, numeric indicators like query time, connections, cache hit ratio. Traces, end-to-end request flows across services and database calls. Together, they provide full visibility into system behavior and performance. White heavy checkmark 83. How do you monitor PostgreSQL performance in production? Use tools like pg_stat_statements, pgadmin, pghero, or pgbadger. Monitor metrics like cache hit ratio, slow queries, connection pool size, long-running queries. Integrate with Prometheus plus Grafana for dashboards and alerts. White heavy checkmark 84. What are slow query logs and how do you use them? Slow query logs track queries that exceed a defined time threshold. You can analyze these logs to identify poorly written queries, tune indexes or rewrite joins, understand real-world usage patterns. In PostgreSQL, you configure this with log_min_duration_ statement. White heavy checkmark 85. What is tracing and how does it help in a distributed system with databases? Tracing follows a single request through all the services and database interactions it touches. It helps identify which part of the stack is slow, where failures occur, how long each DB query took. Tools include OpenTelemetry, Jaeger, Zipkin, and AWS X-Ray. White heavy checkmark 86. What is the importance of correlation IDs in distributed logging and tracing? A correlation ID is a unique identifier passed through service calls and logged in each system. It allows engineers to trace a single request across microservices, logs, and databases, essential for debugging complex flows. White heavy checkmark 87. How do you handle and structure logs for backend and database layers? Best practices include: use structured logging, e.g., JSON format. Include timestamp, service name, log level, trace ID, DB query, if needed. Avoid logging sensitive data. Use log aggregation tools like ELK, Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana, Loki, or CloudWatch logs. White heavy checkmark 88. What are common metrics to monitor in a production database? Some key metrics: CPU and memory usage, number of connections, query duration, cache hit ratio, lock weights and deadlocks, disk I/O. These help you detect overload, inefficient queries, or potential outages. White heavy checkmark 89. How do you set up alerting for database health? Use tools like Prometheus, Datadog, or AWS CloudWatch to define thresholds and alert rules. High query duration, too many connections, low cache hit ratio, auto vacuum not running. Alerts can be sent via email, Slack, or incident systems like PagerDuty. 90. How do you handle errors from the database gracefully in your backend code? Use proper exception handling and avoid leaking database errors directly to users. Common strategies: retry on transient errors, fail fast on known errors, e.g., constraint violation. Use transaction rollbacks when needed. Log details with correlation ID. Show user-friendly error messages. White heavy checkmark 91. What is the difference between OLTP and OLAP databases? OLTP, Online Transaction Processing, is designed for handling day-to-day operations like inserts, updates, and deletes. It powers applications like e-commerce or banking. OLAP, Online Analytical Processing, is optimized for complex analytical queries over large volumes of historical data, ideal for dashboards, BI, and reporting. White heavy checkmark 92. What is a data warehouse and how is it different from a relational database? A data warehouse is a specialized database optimized for analytical queries on historical data. It's read-heavy and uses denormalized schemas like star or snowflake models. It differs from relational databases, OLTP, in terms of storage format, columnar versus row-based, indexing, query optimization techniques. Examples: Amazon Redshift, Snowflake, Google BigQuery. White heavy checkmark 93. How does partitioning work in PostgreSQL and why is it useful? Partitioning splits large tables into smaller, manageable pieces called partitions. Each partition holds a subset of data, e.g., by month or region. PostgreSQL automatically routes inserts and queries. Benefits: faster query performance on filtered ranges. Easier maintenance, e.g., drop old partitions. Reduces index size per partition. White heavy checkmark 94. What is table inheritance in PostgreSQL and how is it related to partitioning? Table inheritance lets you define child tables that inherit columns from a parent table. It was the old way to do manual partitioning before native support. Modern PostgreSQL versions now recommend declarative partitioning instead, which is more performant and manageable. White heavy checkmark 95. What is replication in PostgreSQL? Replication copies data from a primary server to one or more standby servers for high availability or read scaling. Types: streaming replication, binary level, near real time. Logical replication, row level, allows selective table replication. Tools: PG_base backup, PG_receival, or third-party tools like Bucardo. White heavy checkmark 96. What is the difference between physical and logical replication? Physical replication replicates the actual disk-level data, faster, simpler. Logical replication replicates changes at the row level, more flexible, supports selective table replication and version upgrades. White heavy checkmark 97. How do you achieve high availability in PostgreSQL? HA setup often includes primary standby replication, automatic failover using tools like Patroni, repmgr, or pgauto failover, load balancers, e.g., HA proxy, PG bouncer. To route traffic. It ensures minimal downtime during failure or maintenance. 98. How do you handle database backups and disaster recovery in PostgreSQL? Backups. Logical, pg_dump, pg_restore, great for smaller datasets. Physical, pg_base backup, WAL archiving, better for large, high-traffic DBs. You should test restore processes regularly and have point-in-time recovery, PITR, set up for critical systems. White heavy checkmark 99. What is a write-ahead log, WAL, in PostgreSQL? WAL is a log of all changes before they're written to disk. It ensures durability and supports crash recovery, replication, point-in-time recovery. Each transaction must be logged in WAL before it is considered committed. White heavy checkmark 100. What strategies can you use to scale PostgreSQL for large systems? Some strategies include vertical scaling, more CPU, RAM, SSD. Read replicas, offload read traffic. Sharding, split data across multiple DBs, with apps or middleware managing it. Connection pooling, use PG bouncer or Hikari CP. Partitioning plus indexing, optimize query performance. Caching. Use Redis/Memcached to reduce DB load.